All right, let's get it. Drive time on a Tuesday afternoon. 8 minutes past the hour, 2 o'clock. Summer's here. It is hot. It is sunny. My dog is sweating. I had to leave him in the car while I went to get a little gas, and I came back, and I thought he had ran 10 miles. It is about 91 degrees and sunny here in downtown Salt Lake City, Utah. And as it is every single day, it's good to have you along for the ride. Spence Checketts behind the mic, Porter Larson behind the glass producing the show. Booking a really good guest list. We have some good guests today to talk about a number of different topics. It is an off day for both pro hockey and pro basketball. The NBA Finals resumes tomorrow. Reminder, it's on our radio station. Just want to throw that out there right off the top. We have the NBA Finals. We also have the battle for Lord Stanley's Cup that took a little bit of a shift last night. Florida looked really, really good after two super competitive games. The Florida Panthers absolutely curb stomped the Edmonton Oilers 6-1. Sam Bennett, future member of the Utah Mammoth. He is a free agent. He's exactly what our local team needs. Another goal for him. Brad Marchand becomes the oldest hockey player ever to score in the first three games of a Stanley Cup final. And Florida takes a 2-1 lead, and they will remain down in Florida for the next game, which will be on Thursday at 6 o'clock. TV for that game is TNT. Radio for that game is our station, ESPN 700. So we'll do some hockey on the show today. We'll do some basketball on the show today. We'll get you ready for Game 3 of the NBA Finals tomorrow. And just a ton of rumors surrounding offseason movement in pro basketball. And so many of those rumors continue to revolve around what the Utah Jazz could potentially do. We are a matter of a couple weeks away from NBA Draft Night on June the 25th. And June the 26th, we'll have first round coverage on the 25th and second round coverage on the 26th. I'll be anchoring our coverage for the station. And we'll have two longtime NBA minds and executives along for the ride, Gordy Chase and Richard Smith, two members of our family here on ESPN 700 to help us break down draft picks, help us understand what's happening behind closed doors in war rooms. And we will be out and about. We're going to announce our location because we'd love to see you guys. If you're looking for a place to grab some food, grab some drinks, and hang out and watch the NBA draft, you should come do it with us coming up in just a little bit. So, some Jazz off season. Speaking of the NBA draft, there is a riser, according to a couple of new mocks, that have the Utah Jazz looking at maybe a player that we should start paying attention to. Both Jonathan Givony and Sam Vecini. Givony's the ESPN mock draft guy, and Sam works for The Athletic. They both released new mocks today, and we'll tell you who they have the Jazz taking. Little off-season NFL news. It's that time where it's OTAs, mandatory minicamp. I'm using mandatory in air quotes because a lot of players just don't show up. They're waiting for contracts. We'll kind of fill you in. T.J. Watt, Terry McLaurin, among others, not present for, quote, mandatory training camp, OTAs and such. So a little bit of NFL offseason news. Of course, the main piece of news in the world of collegiate athletics is last Friday. We finally saw the House v. NCAA bill be pushed over the line. And we've heard from a number of different people, including all the conference commissioners, about what they hope this could do moving forward. So we'll do some offseason college football. Speaking of college football, University of Utah, according to our Ute insiders that we rely upon for some news, some exciting commits for the 2026 class. Past couple of weekends, kind of an under-the-radar local storyline, Utah football hosting a lot of recruits. And looks like they were able to get a couple across the line today. We'll fill you in on who they are and get to know them a little bit. Jonathan Givony is reporting that Yegor Demon has received a green room invite to attend the NBA draft. That typically means you've been promised something in the lottery, although Rashard Lewis might have something to say about that. Little inside joke for NBA fans. That was the most painful thing. And there are always one or two players, whether it's football or basketball on draft night, that get the invite. And then we all have to sit there and watch them suffer and slide. Usually an awkward girlfriend selfie that is involved in that dynamic. Got to put it on the gram or the talk or whatever the deal is these days. But, yeah, right around the corner there when it comes to the NBA draft. So we'll get to as much of it as we can today. Our first guest, one of my favorites, to interview really about everything because he does a little bit of everything. He is a legend. And for my money, one of, if not the best in the business when it comes to college basketball, pro basketball, football, whatever it is. Ian Eagle CBS, TNT, TBS as well, does a bunch of different. You guys know Ian Eagle. He's a legend and friend of the show. So the Bird, as they call him, will stop by today right off the top. Tim McMahon, our weekly conversation with the ESPN insider who covers the Utah Jazz and the NBA. I would imagine Timmy's live in Indianapolis. It is a travel day for media and such to get to Indiana for Game 3 at Gainsbridge Fieldhouse. That arena is going to be rocking. I'll tell you what. It has been 25 years since Indianapolis, which is a great basketball town, although I hate the Indiana Pacers. That is a great basketball town. It's been 20 years since they've had an NBA Finals game in their city. That will change tomorrow. So we'll check in live in Indianapolis with Tim McMahon. We'll also get to know a gentleman named Brad Knight today, who hosts a podcast about the Indiana Pacers for the Believe Network. Pacers Post Up is Brad's podcast, so we'll do some NBA Finals with Brad. And then we are contractually obligated to talk to Dave Fox during the 4 o'clock hour, as I will be on TV with Dave tonight at 10:35 on KMYU. We call it 5 Questions with Spence. And you know summer's here, Porter, because Dave sends me the 5 questions that he's going to ask me in the daytime. Tonight, I have to answer 2 questions about the U.S. Open and 1 question about the Royals, NWSL.
Ooh, I love it.
Summertime is here, man. It just is.
Yeah. Listen, we still luckily have NBA Finals. We have the NBA Draft. You can talk about prospects all you want. I might remind you, we are 81 days away from Utah football. So
you don't have to remind me of that.
There's light at the end of the tunnel. But yeah, we may have to get a little creative with some of the sports talk topics over the next couple of months and weeks. But that's something we're used to. I don't know. We'll get some epidemiologists, some comedians, some who else do you want to talk to?
Okay, first of all, don't do that. You are giving me PTSD from doing sports talk radio during COVID.
Yeah.
That was 5 years ago.
Seismologists. Let's get some seismologists on the show.
We've moved on, okay? Although I do have a bunch of people I knew in college who did lean into this amateur epidemiologist approach, and now they're political experts, and I learned so much from their social media posts about the southern border.
Tariffs.
The tariffs. It's amazing that the dumbest kids I went to college with think they're experts on all the things that are plaguing our society.
I didn't go to college with you.
Do you fancy yourself as an amateur I know you fancy yourself as an amateur meteorologist.
I like to keep up on stuff.
Weather patterns and such?
Mostly weather patterns and stuff. Less political patterns and such than I used to.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. So a lot to do on a busy Tuesday show. Ian Eagle, Tim McMahon, Brad Knight, Dave Fox, me, Spence Checketts, all of you, the great listeners. Ian will be our first guest right out of the gates today. But before we get to Ian Eagle on a hot Tuesday afternoon in June here in downtown Salt Lake City, courtesy of our good friends, your good friends too at Prize Picks. It's time now for your opening tip.
Welcome to The Drive with Spence Checketts on Utah's #1 sports talk. Now into the studios of ESPN 700 to set the scene for the show. The opening tip of The Drive is brought to you by Prize Picks. Use the code ESPN700 and run your game with Prize Picks.
Prize Picks, it's the best place to turn your sports knowledge into cash. With 2 million members, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You can just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. You can run your game all season long on Prize Picks. There's only one series left in the playoffs, and the championship is officially on the line. That means time is running out for you to put your final takes to the test on Prize Picks, the best place to cash in on your favorite sport. So here's what you do. You download the Prize Picks app today. You use that promo code ESPN700. And when you play your first $5 lineup, they're going to hook you up with $50 on the house. Do not even have to win that $5 lineup. They're just going to give you $50. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700. Play that first $5 lineup. They're going to hook you up with $50. And you better run and do this, because as of today, you're getting a free NBA Finals pick. It's Jalen Williams more or less than 0.5 points. So all Jalen Williams has to do is score a point, and you will win, which means you have to match that with one other square, and you can win up to 2,000 times your cash with our good friends at Prize Picks. All right, so a couple things here. Jonathan Gavoni, and I like Gavoni. I think he's smart. He does a lot of work. He's worked hard in his space for a number of different years. and Sam Vecini. So Gavoni is the ESPN NBA mock draft analyst and does really good work. I utilized a lot of Jonathan's stuff on the show. Once upon a time, we didn't really have these specialists in media, but that's changed over the past, 7, 8 years. And so I like to I do the same thing with college recruiting. When it comes to insiders that study high school football players and understand exactly what these recruits can do, I just lean into their work because they're doing this all day, every day. And Sam Vecini also does a great job with The Athletic. And there's an interesting name that we haven't talked much about. And honestly, I'm not sure how I feel about it. So we'll look at Gavoni's stuff when it comes to the Utah Jazz and where they find themselves. Should they stay at 5? Should they stay at 21? And a couple of second rounders to boot. Will they utilize these assets to try to make a bigger trade? Our friend Sarah Todd from the Deseret News is reporting that she's hearing Walker Kessler is a name that the Jazz are taking calls on. And a couple of different media outlets, including, let's see, I know Bill Simmons talked about this on his pod. Hoops Hype also reported via their rumor page that the Jazz are fielding calls on Lauri Markkanen as well. I talked about this as the last season was ending, then throughout the course of the lottery process that saw the Jazz fall to 5. Lauri is awesome, but he's 28. He'll be 29 next year, and there's just a case to be made that he doesn't fit this timeline. And then I also wonder where Lauri's head is at. Now, obviously, Lauri's head is fine. He's a max money player under contract for another 4 years, making ridiculous generational wealth. But at some point throughout the course of your career as a professional, you do look around at your peers that are playing for and competing for and winning championships, and you want to be part of that ecosystem in the bigger picture of pro basketball. Lauri seems to very much like it here. I actually saw him on the golf course a couple of weeks ago up at Mountain Dell. And we like it when you like us. The Salt Lake City, kind of the state of Utah inferiority complex can be a little bit puzzling at times, but we want you to like us because we've had so many players just leave and so many players demand trades. And we've seen it with the best players that we've had here since John and Carl retired. And that's that's really what it comes down to. I was thinking about this morning. ESPN's NBA show, NBA Today, is on location at Gainsbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis. And they were talking about how it's been 25 years since Indianapolis had an NBA Finals game in their city. And for us, it's been, 27? Yeah, it was 1998. So we're now one of those markets where people are looking like, dude, when's the last time the Jazz were competing for championships? And if we're salient and honest in this conversation, it has not been since 1998. It just hasn't. The D. Will Booz years were fun. Hayward Favors, a little bit of a bridge before Gordon leaves. Then obviously Mitchell, Gobert, that group coached by Quinn for, 6, 7, 8 years. A lot of regular season success, but never made it to the conference finals. It's just been a number of years since we had a team that went deep in the playoffs with an actual shot to win the whole thing. So when the Jazz fell to 5, and there is no quick fix. There's no Cooper Flagg on the way. There's no Victor Wembanyama on the way. There's probably no Dylan Harper on the way. There's going to be a good, young, promising prospect on the way, but nothing too intoxicating to motivate other vets throughout the league to say, yeah, I want to go play for the Jazz because they've got that guy. And that's why hitting on your draft picks becomes so paramount, because once you actually have a generational piece that is starting to show this progress of growing into something generationally special, it does attract other good veteran players from around the league to take a second look at you if maybe they wouldn't otherwise. San Antonio is the perfect example of it after drafting Wembanyama with Chris Paul, yes, a little bit later in his career for sure, but signing to play alongside him. De'Aaron Fox greenlighting a trade to the San Antonio Spurs, to play in that market. And San Antonio has the number 2 pick in the draft. They're probably going to draft Dylan Harper, although there's some interesting news about Con Knippel really rising up draft boards. Gavoni today, number 1, of course, is Cooper Flagg. But number 2, Gavoni's new mock says this: San Antonio Spurs, the pick that he says fills the biggest need is Con Knippel at 2. And that means they would pass on Dylan Harper. That is counter to any piece of information I've seen prior to today. But a lot of people are drawing this parallel between Con Knippel at 5 and the Jazz and believing that's a match that could actually work. I don't know that I like that, and we'll get into it a little bit later as to why. Con Knippel certainly was overshadowed by Cooper Flagg at Duke. I don't know if he's the best shooter in the draft, but he's probably one of the top 2 or 3, maybe alongside the Trey Johnson kid. Of course, we've talked about VJ Edgecombe. We've talked about a bunch of different options, Ace Bailey that could be there at 5. But ultimately, the fact of the matter is, not grabbing the number 1 overall pick this year was another step in the wrong direction, if I could be Captain Obvious on the show today, because it does set you back and it does reset your timeline. And you have to look at this a little bit differently. So while Lowry is really, really good, does he want to stick around for it? Because if we're honest, this is a 2 or 3 year process before they're even proficient, if we want to be real. So does Markkanen want to be here until he's 31, 32, when this team might have some pieces around him that make them somewhat relevant in the Western Conference? I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's worth talking about, because otherwise, why would the Jazz take phone calls on Lowry? Because if they're taking phone calls on Markkanen and on Kessler, it indicates to me that the front office has done their calculation to believe that we have to reset the timeline even further than we've already reset it. And if we draft a 18, 19-year-old Ace Bailey, VJ Edgecombe, Trey Johnson to put alongside our 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old other players, there are, I think, 8 players under the age of 23 on the roster. So if we add 5 and 21, and they're both 18, 19, 20, whatever it is, and maybe 2 second-rounders that are also in their late teens, early 20s, does it really make sense, quite frankly, to have any of these veterans on the roster? Because if we take Austin Ainge at his word, which is this season will be best foot forward to compete instead of being unserious about competition and not approaching roster construction with actual integrity, the only way for that to make sense is if you do what the Wizards did last year and only play your kids. So no John Collins, no Jordan Clarkson, no Colin Sexton, no Larry Markkanen. I think it's a tough ask to trade Walker, and I always get a kick out of it whenever there's a rumor about Walker Kessler. You just hear from people like, yeah, the Lakers should just go get him. Oh, okay. Just trade him to the Lakers. Walker's good, and he is still young. That's a tough one. I get the Markkanen stuff, and I would get the Collins stuff and the Sexton stuff and the Clarkson stuff. Like, move on from them. That's fine. And it actually becomes a little bit easier now because all of these contracts are expiring. Now, what makes it complicated is you do not want to take money back in return unless that money is attached to a player that you really like, who also wants to be here for a long time, and if we're honest, is probably very, very young. But guess what? Teams don't want to trade players like that. The Vegas odds right now, once again, have the Golden State Warriors as the favorites to make a play for Lowry. We'll get into this coming up in a bit, but there is a trade with Golden State for Markkanen that I actually think makes sense for both sides. But we'll catch a quick break because we got to bring in Ian Eagle coming up on the other side, one of my favorites. We'll do a little bit of football, a little bit of basketball, maybe a little tennis. Ian's called tennis and some golf. We'll kind of bounce around. He's a great guest. Then we move over to Tim McMahon. It's Brad Knight. It's Dave Fox. Jam-packed, busy on a Tuesday show, and it's good to have you with us right here on ESPN 700. NBA Finals Game 3 tomorrow, 6:30 Mountain Time. We're your home for the finals here in the market. So you can hear that game on our station. You can also hear the battle for Lord Stanley's Cup on this radio station as well, as Florida takes a 2-1 lead last night with a pretty convincing, well, very convincing 6-1 win over Edmonton. Our next guest, it's been a minute, but I always smile when I see him on the rundown because I know we're going to have a good time on a Tuesday afternoon with the legend himself, Ian Eagle. Ian, happy Tuesday, sir. How are you?
Hey, what's up, Spence? Thank you very much for the in-bump music. Little Don Henley, Eagles. I see the connection, synchronicity.
You got it, my friend. Is this the time of year where you can actually take a deep breath and have a little bit of time off? Am I reading that correctly?
You are. Yeah,
okay.
Today, literally. Today was the day, and then Porter reached out to me, so that ended.
So we're ruining your free time. But truly, I mean, you're a man that grinds and works, and I feel like you're doing something like, are you able to breathe a little bit right now? Are you busy working like you seem to always be?
No, I'm definitely breathing. I do some voiceover stuff. I had an NBA voiceover today, so I wasn't completely off, but it's not heavy lifting this time of year. And yeah, it's been great. It's been terrific just to recharge the battery, to watch the game in a different way, through a different lens, the lens of a fan, while also watching it with historical perspective in mind. But the NBA Finals is still a crowning achievement, and these two teams are just outstanding storylines that deserve to be where they are. They've earned their right to play on the biggest stage.
They have. So let's do some NBA. Let's do some pro basketball. And, Ian, it's actually fun to watch the Knicks play themselves into relevance for the first time in a long, long time. And obviously so many memories come flooding back when you see Knicks Pacers, certainly with those two teams battling, the Pacers deserving victors. But what did you make of the decision to relieve Tom Thibodeau of his duties after bringing them to the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time in 25 years?
Yeah, a little surprised. Anticipated that they would run it back. He had just signed an extension. Obviously, things were trending in the right direction. They improved each year. They got a round further than they had previously with Tom Thibodeau as the head coach. But those pesky little exit interviews could certainly play a role, as we know, in trying to determine the best direction of the team. And my understanding is that some of that may have gone sideways for Tibbs. And unfortunately, as we know, that is enough to cost you your job in the current climate of the NBA. Players have a lot of power, and rightfully so. They deserve to have some say, but there are certain owners that will not get involved in that end of it. It feels like this may have been a different set of circumstances where there were some feelings within one side of management that maybe it was time to make a change and get some new blood and a new voice in. And look, the results will tell the story. I don't think they're going to run it back with the same exact team. I think there will be changes and certainly a change in philosophy. Ended up calling a bunch of their postseason games in that first round series against Detroit and got a feel for how hard this team fights and the improvement that we saw. But ultimately, the way that Coach Tibbs approaches this, it may have been his undoing. The fact that he just believes in riding the starters' heavy minutes, and then when they needed some others to step forward, they really didn't have the options they were hoping for in the conference finals.
I don't want to sound like the guy that's calling these young NBA players coddled, but I wonder, Michael Malone loses his job 2 years after winning the championship. Taylor Jenkins, who kind of has that old school abrasive communication style, loses his job after doing a really, not just adequate, but excellent job with the young Memphis team when they were healthy and Ja was acting right or whatever. And now Tom loses his job. Is the older approach, is the Greg Popovich, Jerry Sloan old school approach, is that out the window based off of maybe how you have to communicate with these younger NBA players?
It probably is, and you just have to look at the economics of it. When you take the top three highest paid players on an NBA team, they in essence have become almost partners with the owners based on their yearly salary and the commitment level it takes. When you look at the Supermax and how much money you have to invest in these players. And it is an investment. So if things aren't going according to plan, it's much easier to change a coach who might be making $4 million, $5 million, $8 million a year, even on the higher end, than it is to make an adjustment with a player who you're on the hook for in excess of $200 or $300 million. So just look at how things work in the world and who's going to have a little bit more say and who's going to have leverage in that situation. You have unique circumstances. San Antonio certainly had them because Pop kept winning and they reinvented themselves, and then they won again with a whole different set of players. So once you get to that place of credibility, ownership is going to side with a Greg Popovich. But even a title, you mentioned it, Mike Malone won the title with Denver, and then there's our struggle with the Nuggets between head coach and GM, and then they both lost because ownership decided that there was too much toxicity and the players weren't responding. So, look, Spence, you've been around this your whole life. I think sometimes it's easy to make proclamations from the outside, and if you don't have all the information, if you're not privy to it, you may not be aware of the inner workings of a franchise. In the Knicks case, it's not cut and dry. You've got some people within upper management that have a say in matters of the future, and their say might be very different than the vision of the head coach in this particular example with New York.
It just one more thing here, then we'll move on, because honestly, the Pacers deserve their flowers for winning the series. But, you live back there, obviously, you know the tone and tenor of how it's worked. And for so many years, and I will just say it, I do think it comes from their owner, who does play kazoo as a front man in his band and forces his employees to go watch his band. And for so many years, I felt like it was the decisions made out of emotion that seemed to be overly reactive that wouldn't allow them any traction. And I'm watching them this year. I'm like, okay, finally Leon Rose was able to do this the right way over the course of a number of years, make some savvy decisions. A lot of people question the Jalen thing. It's clearly worked. They took a risk getting rid of DiVincenzo and Randall to bring in Cat. And, I do think Cat has, his warts defensively, but I think he played pretty well year one in New York. And I don't think they're a championship roster. I didn't think they were this year, but this once again reeks of desperation. It reeks of impulsivity from an owner that doesn't seem to know how to be patient. And I don't know what's reasonable to expect for a new coach to get more out of this roster, Ian. I really don't.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we could play the what-if game, Spence, but there are many that believe if they got clipped by the Celtics, the defending champions, in the second round and lost in 6 games, that Tom Thibodeau may have survived it because they weren't necessarily expected to beat Boston. But how does that work when you're actually a victim of your own success? You beat Boston, you lose to a team that maybe ownership believed you should beat after losing to them last year. And the disappointment of losing to Indiana might have been enough for ownership to then determine, hey, we gotta change some things. We have to alter what our process is. And look, the fact of the matter is we do not know what was said behind closed doors. We don't know what the top stars said. We don't know if there were leading questions for the stars in those exit interviews to get them down a track that allowed and enabled ownership to justify the move. Ultimately, and you could say Leon Rose is in charge, and look, I do think he's been given a lot of freedom with this roster, but he still has a boss, and his boss owns the team. And if the owner wanted to make a change, guess what? They're going to make a change.
So I've got to say, I've been no part of me as a Pacers fan, that will not surprise you, but I've been wildly impressed with the way Rick Carlisle's been able to get this group to figure it out. I mean, nobody had them going to the finals to start the year. They're 10-15 early on, injury issues, and he is maximizing guys like Nembhard and Nesmith. I mean, the whole discourse around Halliburton has been exhausting. He's an Olympian. He's been an all-star. He's awesome. Like, we don't need to debate whether or not he's good. But it's the ancillary pieces that Rick has been able to fit that's been really impressive. So as you watch them advance to the finals and we find themselves very much in this series. What stood out most to you about the way Rick's coached them up?
Well, it's interesting. I have some experience early in the season. The Nets played the Pacers, and Indiana was completely out of sorts at that point. So that was during that start that you just mentioned. And I was shocked because they were a conference finalist the year before. They were an offensive juggernaut in the 23-24 season, and we just weren't seeing it. And Halliburton did look a bit lost, and the magic that we had seen from previous seasons just wasn't there. His confidence level wasn't there. Coming off the Olympics, we later come to find out he wasn't 100%. Physically, he was laboring, and it took some time for him to finally get back into the rhythm. Next time I saw them was a nationally televised game on TNT. It was the Knicks and Pacers, and they didn't play very well. The Knicks beat them that night. Karl Anthony Towns went off. They had no answers for him. And I remember sitting with Rick Carlisle prior to the game, and Carlisle is a deep thinker and is a basketball genius. But I felt like he knew it was going to be okay. You know, when you sense that from someone, despite the result, I just got the feeling from our 15 minutes pregame that he recognized that this team was going to make it work, and basically told us, it was Grant Hill and I that did that game together. And then the next time I see him come playoff time, everything is now clicking, and everything that Rick envisioned has come to fruition with this group. They're deep. They are versatile. They share the ball. Siakam has been the perfect fit, championship pedigree. He has proved himself to be one of the most valuable pieces in the NBA. You mentioned Nesmith, unsung. Nembhard, unsung. T.J. McConnell, unsung. There's a recurring theme with Indiana. And when they needed a performance from Thomas Bryant, he steps forward. Obi Toppin occasionally gives you a little extra juice. So this is beyond just Tyrese Halliburton, as you mentioned. So a lot of respect for this group. Very tough. Never count them out. They find a way. With all of that said, I think what you saw in the first two games is very real. And yes, they're going home, and that should provide an advantage. They stole game one, which was huge, but they're still the underdogs in this series. OKC, they're just so ridiculously deep and talented that it's going to be a big challenge for Indiana to overcome.
I agree with that. I picked OKC in 5, which does not make me unique at all. I would not be stunned if Indiana gets one at Gainesbridge, because that crowd is going to be ready. It's been 25 years, right, since the finals in Indianapolis, which is a great basketball city. So I can see them getting one. But before we move on from this, how do you see the rest of it playing out? Do you have a lean one way or the other?
No, I'm leaning towards what you just mentioned. I think they get one, but I don't think they get any more than that the rest of the way. So then that would mean OKC wins the NBA title in Indianapolis in 6 games, and that's probably how it's going to play out. How game 3 goes might change the way we view it. If Indiana goes up 2-1 and then the pressure builds on OKC, then maybe we're singing a different tune. But to me, this just has the feel of a 6-game NBA Finals with the most dominant team of the season emerging as the champion and hoisting the trophy when it's all said and done.
So our Utah Jazz out this way, Ian, had the worst season in franchise history, and certainly was by design. And so we were all gathered around the television hoping that we would learn that Cooper Flagg is on his way, and he's not. The Jazz, I say fall to 5, but ultimately the best chance was the 5th pick. It was a 47.8% chance or whatever, only a 14% chance for one. What do you think of the way the NBA does this as far as the lottery process? Of course, we are a little bit frosty out here. We were hoping for number 1.
Yeah, I think the NBA has made it very clear that they don't want teams tanking, and yet teams still tank, because just look at what OKC has done. OKC has done it the right way. They've stockpiled picks. They've been fortunate in the lottery, and when they haven't been as fortunate in the lottery, they've hit home runs in the first round. They found players that other teams may not have been interested and turned them into something. So I think the Thunder probably end up being the template that everybody wants to follow, but that requires someone like Sam Presti to run your basketball operations and be incredibly shrewd and make strong move after strong move after strong move in the draft and free agency and in trades. The lottery itself is what it is, and I know it from the Brooklyn side of things. The fan base got very upset when the team started winning games and they were competitive. But I can just tell you that Jordi Fernandez didn't view it the same way as the fans. He viewed it as, hey, these games go on my permanent record. I'm trying to create a feeling of winning within the franchise. And I also want to let people know around the league that I can coach. I know what I'm doing. And I do understand all of that. I understand his perspective and trying to run a program day in and day out and not just looking for ways to lose, but looking for ways to improve. And sometimes the young guys just did enough to win games they weren't supposed to win. And, clearly, similar to Jazz fans, Nets fans were not happy on draft night. Many years ago, the Nets had one of the worst seasons in NBA history, and they ended up with the third pick. That was the John Wall draft. I remember watching the lottery that year thinking, okay, this is it. This is the guy. This is the one that's going to change their franchise. Washington gets the first pick. Nets don't get the second pick either. Evan Turner is the second pick that year, and the Nets end up selecting Derek Favors, who, as you know, they used in the Darren Williams deal. So you can have best laid plans, and then reality hits you in the face.
As someone who had a front row seat, I'm sure multiple times to watch Cooper Flagg this year at Duke,
Yep.
is he everything he's cracked up to be? I mean, it's such a weird thing to try to analyze these young men because there's so many things that could happen that could derail them. I don't know that he's Victor Wembanyama generational, according to people that study this, but it feels like a lot of people believe that he's next in line. Is he going to live up to the Billy Nine?
Yeah, I'd be surprised if he's not a big-time player. He looks to me like an all-star player. He can do everything. And the other part that is hard to gauge because you never quite know until they get there, he wants to be great, and he'll do the work necessary to be great, and he's got the right mindset to be great. So if you and I are having this conversation in 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, and Cooper Flagg did not live up to the billing, I will look back and say that I was a bit shocked because the skill level is there and the determination is there. You can't ever truly know what's in someone's heart, but despite all the money NIL this year, despite all the ballyhoo, despite all the buzz and the hype, he was everything that they thought he was going to be and more. So I'm just using that mentality to the next level. The skills are there. The versatility is there. Two-way performer. I think he's going to be a legitimate star in the NBA, yes.
I think one of the other things that seems to be, stinging folks around here a little bit is you look at the past, 5, 6, 7 years in pro basketball where teams in Milwaukee and Denver have won championships. And this year, Indianapolis and Oklahoma City, market sizes that are in our ecosystem, kind of where we exist in our cul-de-sac. And certainly it's by design. Adam Silver has spoken about this, and you certainly know this. This is a new era of NBA basketball with very punitive economics if you decide that you only write checks for the best talent in the league. That's no longer sustainable. I mean, the new owners of the Boston Celtics have a $500 luxury tax bill just to have the roster. And so I think one of the things that is kind of, disappointing about where we find ourselves is the Jazz currently are not prepared to capitalize on this new ecosystem where it doesn't matter where you are, you're able to do this anywhere. I wonder what your thoughts are on that, and hopefully the Jazz are able to capitalize on this before the CBA ends in 5 years to be one of these teams in a small market that's throwing punches with the other best teams in the league.
Yeah, and what's the common theme of all the teams that you just mentioned? Their superstars were not top 3 or top 5 picks.
Yep.
Giannis Antetokounmpo, anybody could have had him. Without a doubt, Nikola Jokic, anybody could have had him. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, he was not a top 5 pick. He had a really nice rookie season for the Clippers, and because Kawhi Leonard was in the process of signing and wanted another proven star with him, they make the deal with OKC for Paul George, and it turns out to be a lopsided deal in favor of the Thunder, as SGA turns into an MVP and Hall of Famer before our eyes. So everything that we talked about earlier in regards to making smart basketball decisions, having some good luck and good fortune, that's where you stand if you're a Utah Jazz fan. It doesn't have to be the bona fide number 1, number 2 overall pick, but you gotta make a lot of contact when it comes to this draft. Jalen Williams, another one that comes to mind with OKC, not a top 5 pick. They found him. They developed him. He developed very quickly into an all-star, into an all-NBA team performer. And that's what it comes down to. It's not just lucking out with the ping pong balls going your way. Of course, San Antonio, Victor Wembanyama, nobody's going to turn that down. But I look at the record, Spence. It hasn't backed up what Victor is capable of because, A, he was on a bad team in his first year. B, he got hurt in his second year. C, he's playing in a highly competitive Western Conference. So even getting the generational talent guarantees you nothing in terms of team success.
This is true, Ian. Before I set you loose, you referenced NIL earlier. And a couple of figures here. So according to Front Office Sports, the NBA draft is down on participants. 106 players entered the draft this year. That's the lowest number of early entrants since 2015. Early entrants peaked in 2021 with 363, and we all know what happened in 2021. That's when NIL became a reality. In April, the NFL draft had 69 underclassmen enter the draft. That's down from 128 in 2021. Do you think NIL will have a adverse effect on collegiate athletics, or the fact that more kids seem to be staying to play because they can make money? Will that make the product better, both college football and college basketball?
Yeah, I mean, Spence, I'm not going with recency bias here, but having called the Final Four in San Antonio, those 3 games, both semifinals and championship game, were played at an extremely high level. All 4 teams were exceptional teams, and it was all number 1 seeds emerging. I don't think it was by accident. I do believe there's been a cause and effect. I do believe NIL has been a big reason why we've seen this new storyline emerge. And while I know that there are those that bemoan the fact they're not getting the Cinderella stories in the first and second round, what we saw was more competitive basketball come Sweet 16, Elite 8, and beyond. Does that continue? I tend to think it will until things level out, or if there's a salary cap, which eventually may come, by the way, that players are just going to slot in to where they fit, that you can pay your lead star X and your second biggest player Y and down the line. And that's where they might be able to maintain the competitive balance with some of the mid-level programs. But for now, it's Cowboys and Indians. It's who's got the most money, who's got the payroll. The other part about it is you can make a mistake and then bounce back if you're a Kansas. They made mistakes in their roster this past year. Guess what? They're going to reload for 25-26. I doubt that they're going to make the same mistakes 2 years in a row. But it does show that you've got to be a very well-scouted group of coaches and beyond, because now they have GMs of these college teams to project the future. You're obviously fishing for major stars, but just because you pay them a ridiculous amount of money doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily deliver for you. So there is that part of the equation too, of some teams are just better at evaluating talent, and we saw that this past year.
Ian, thank you, sir. Always a pleasure. We'll let you get back to putting your feet up on the sofa with a little bit of free time before you're back to the grind. So be well, and we'll chat soon. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, appreciate it, Spence. Always great talking to you, man. All the best.
Ian Eagle, play-by-play voice, CBS, TNT, TBS, does basketball, football, tennis, golf, does a little bit of everything. He's won like 70 Emmys. I always lose track. I feel like he wins it every year, and obviously his son Noah, a rising star in that space as well. All right, we got 1 hour down. We have 3 hours to go. Coming up on the other side, it's our weekly conversation with the great Tim McMahon. He is banned McMahon. He is the great Tim McMahon, who just a couple of days ago was on television sporting a very handsome cowboy hat for his ESPN Sports Center hits. Tim, happy Tuesday. Was that your idea, or was the idea of one of the producers?
Howdy, partner. No, that was definitely the idea of one of the producers. It actually is, believe it or not, the first cowboy hat of my life.
Are you serious? Because you looked like that was like a consistent thing that you sport from time to time.
Well, listen, I am a Texan, but my first cowboy hat, and I can pull off a lot of looks.
You sure can. Now, what was on the field? Which kicks did you go with for the cowboy hat?
It was a simple look that day. It was just some nice white and brown Nike Blazer lows.
Okay, very, very nice. I've got to ask because I feel like everybody's been complaining. Did you run into travel issues going from OKC to Indianapolis as well?
Wasn't too bad.
Okay.
Had the always, mixed emotions layover in my home airport where I don't actually get to go home. But other than that, no. Just, a little connection here, and boom, there I was.
Okay, fair enough. Well, since we're in Salt Lake, Tim, I won't bury the lead. I'll ask you a couple Jazz questions because over the past 24 or 48 hours, Sarah Todd, friend of the show, works for the Deseret News. Bill Simmons himself has talked about this. I think Zach Lowe, your former buddy, talked about it as well, that apparently, according to several outlets and sources, the Jazz are actively taking calls on Lowry and Walker, who I think are the two best players on the roster. Can you shed some light on this as a guy who knows people over there and covers the Jazz for ESPN?
Yeah, well, they actively took calls on him last summer, too. So it's not necessarily a change. I mean, I think, as we found out last summer, there's a long way from actively taking calls to getting a trade done. I mean, they took a lot of calls on both those guys last summer and never got anywhere close to making a trade. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there's no way those guys will be traded. If you're willing to listen, you're willing to make a trade. But I do think that the price is still pretty high. And, I don't know, obviously Austin Ainge is running the show over there now. I don't know if the price will be as high as it was last summer. But, there was a whole lot of talk about Lowry going to the Warriors. That never got close because not only were the Warriors not willing to discuss Brendan Podziemski, but the picks, they never got close in the picks either. So we'll see what happens. Stay tuned. I do think though that when you heard Austin Ainge basically say we're not going to tank by manipulating minutes, basically they're not going to tank with disingenuous injury reports is what he meant as well there. He didn't say they weren't going to be bad. He didn't say that the roster wouldn't be very difficult to win with next year. And so, I'll put it like this. I don't think that the Jazz are planning to win 35 games next year.
So ultimately, if all of this is true, and I have no idea, it feels like everyone's just discussing the possibility because, as you said, even though Lowry could not be traded after being signed, it felt like prior to them signing him, they were, at least considering moving on from him, at least considering. So if they're really actively, I'm not going to say shopping, to your point, I'll just say taking calls and kicking the tires on the interest for marketing. And the Walker one, I don't know, man. He's 23 and he's so good. That's going to be tough if they end up deciding to move on from him. But is it just safe to surmise that maybe they add number 5 this year and number 21 this year and maybe 2 second rounders that are 19, 20, 21 next to Kyle Filipowski, who's 21, and Isaiah Collier, who's 20, and Taylor Hendricks, who's 21, and Keontae George, who's still young, and Cody, who's 20? Is it safe to say that they're probably just going to maybe do what the Wizards did last year? And no, we're not tanking, but we are playing young players exclusively that aren't ready to win pro basketball games.
I think that's that's a fair belief. I don't know. Look, I thought that they were going to end up trading one of their veterans or even a couple of their veterans, Clarkson, Collins, Colin Sexton, before last year's trade deadline. That never happened. They just have long-running cases of plantar fasciitis, and I don't even remember what else was was on the injury report. If you take Austin Ainge's word, the uncurable plantar fasciitis cases won't continue. But again, I don't think they will have as many veterans on the roster as even they did last year. This is a franchise that's a long way away from putting together a competitive team. Now, Walker Kessler could certainly be part of their next competitive team. I mean, you can make a case that Markkanen could as well. I think it's a little bit harder to make a case with Lowry.
All right, before we move on to the finals, which we will because there are teams playing, do you have a pulse on how the front office feels about this group of young players? And, I mean, it's not fair to lump them all in together because they're unique circumstances, namely Taylor Hendricks got hurt. We don't know as much about him. But the Keontae Georges, the Isaiah Colliers, the Kyle Filipowskis, the Cody Williams, like the draft picks that they've made, the young players they've drafted, how do you think the front office is currently analyzing them and what they could be? I mean, I know it's still so young, but we've got to talk about the players that could be part of the future.
I mean, there have been glimpses from some of those, but like Cody Williams, obviously, you weren't making a lot of grand conclusions about him after last season. You knew he was raw when you drafted him. Didn't do a whole lot in the league. Honestly, it was a lot like Taylor Hendricks, and after his rookie year, they did feel like Taylor Hendricks made some massive strides over the summer, and then unfortunately he got hurt very early in the season. I think out of all the guys you mentioned, Isaiah Collier's probably impressed the most. Keontae George has shown glimpses, but there was disappointment in his lack of competitiveness on the defensive end this year, for sure. So, one thing you can say is there's not a guy who's shown any, who's provided any great reasons for confidence that they can be like a major piece of a championship type of core from that group. Now, they're young. Maybe this, one, two, a few of those guys can grow into that. But for having as many young guys on the roster, you'd hope there would have been more pop so far than there has been from that group.
For sure. No, I agree there. All right, before we get to the finals, I mean, you just hear all of these conversations about what could be a very dramatic, massive offseason in the NBA. And, some coaches have already lost their jobs. We talked about Tom Thibodeau last week. Of all of the big names that could be on the move, that could actually change the landscape of what the league could look like, who would you say is the most realistic, and where would you say is the most realistic landing spot?
Well, I mean, it would be very surprising if Kevin Durant does not get traded. Most realistic spot, that I don't know. There's probably 6, maybe even more than that, like realistic candidates. I just kind of would be throwing darts right now to say where I think he would land out of those. Right now, I'm not sure if Giannis is going to be on the trade market or not. It's really kind of up to him. Like, the Bucks don't want to trade him. If he goes to them and asks out, I think they would grant the request and try to get a good value for him. But it hasn't happened yet, and the Bucks have been out of the playoffs for quite some time. So, the Giannis thing is at a stay tuned stage right now.
So among your duties for the worldwide leader, Dallas Mavericks, of course, is a team you cover and cover well and know people over there. I just don't know why Jason Kidd would leave what Dallas has in exchange for what New York has. And I don't know how real any of this is. Your buddy Brian Windhorst is the one that's talked about it, but they just landed the number 1 overall pick. Yes, they traded your boy Luka, but we're still looking at a roster with AD and Kyrie and some other, PJ Washington, Klay Thompson. It is far from a bad situation. And honestly, with Cooper Flagg on the way, it feels like it could be sustainable for a lot longer than anything New York has on their roster. So how real are these rumors? And if you're Jason Kidd, is that something you really want to look to do?
Well, I would say that the Knicks did just come off of a conference finals appearance with a franchise player who Jason Kidd knows very well and likes a lot, really respects. Talking about Jalen Brunson, obviously. And if there wasn't anything to it, this stuff would have been squashed. If Jason Kidd was just happy to be in Dallas and wouldn't want to consider the Knicks job, he would have made that very clear by now. If the Mavericks were just unwilling to consider allowing Jay Kidd to, and I'm not even going to say talk to the Knicks, to go to the Knicks, because he's not asking for permission to interview. He's asking for permission to be hired. If the Mavericks weren't willing to consider that, it would seem reasonable that they would have made that very clear now. So this stuff has been out there for a little while, and it hadn't been squashed. And so, we will see what happens. But it's also been a pretty sloppy process by the Knicks, if we're being honest. Like, I don't really understand. You fire Tibbs. Your top target is a guy who's with another team. You still haven't asked for permission. Like, I don't know. Like, their plan Bs, apparently, like, Ime Udoka, Rockstar letting that happen. Chris Finch, I'm not sure why the Wolves would allow that to happen. So it's been a strange process by the Knicks.
What would that compensation package look like? New York does not have draft capital. Like, how would that – what do you think that would look like if it actually went down?
I mean, they do have some draft capital. They just don't have, great draft capital. They got kind of a phony first-round pick because of the protections from the Wizards. There's some swaps. There's some, they got seconds. Like, I mean, it's not like the Mavericks are going to get like a bonanza first-round capital out of it, obviously. But here's the thing. If it reaches a point where the Mavericks feel like Jay Kidd has made up his mind, I don't know if you want to prevent him from leaving.
Yeah, that's fair, for sure. All right. Well, there's still teams playing basketball, so let's move over there. Does Oklahoma City's arena remind you at all of the Jazz arena when the Jazz are good in the postseason? Like, it feels like there's that same type of like elevated atmosphere and noise, and the crowd is like on top of you, like it is at the Delta Center. Does it feel at all the way Salt Lake does when the Jazz are good in spring?
Oh yeah. Also, the fact that it's a small market. I know there's hockey now, but when I was covering Jazz playoff games, it was the one major show, the one major league team in town. I would certainly say that those two arenas lead the league in percentage of freebie T-shirts worn. I mean, there's some phenomenal color coordination going on for sure. Like you've seen when the Jazz had like the whole spectrum from red to, orange and yellow and all that. Like, and then I'm telling you, the thing about like OKC, dude, that place is packed and loud for the layup lines, much less opening tip.
Yeah, it looks like a really cool environment. The fan base really enjoying that moment. All right, to start the series, I picked OKC in 5. Doesn't make me unique. Feels like most everybody picked OKC in 4, 5, or 6. Continue to be tremendously impressed that Rick Carlisle is maximizing this roster the way that he is. They're able to get a split heading back to Indianapolis, which will take place tomorrow, which will be on our radio station at 6:30 Mountain Time. Did anything from the first 2 games change your opinion on how this ultimately will play out?
No, it's honestly, credits to the Pacers for getting out of there with a split when they have led for a total of 1 minute and 53 seconds in the first 2 games. In the majority of this series, OKC has had a double-digit lead, but the only thing that matters is it's 1-1. But I tell you what, Shea, by his MVP standards, he had a mediocre 38-point performance in Game 1. Game 2, oh boy, he was cooking. He was comfortable. He was efficient. He was getting everybody else rolling as well. The Pacers have a real problem to figure out there. If Shea is that comfortable, it's going to be hard for the Pacers to win.
The Halliburton stuff, ultimately just nothing through the first 3 quarters and then kind of gets going in the fourth when they were already down 20. But what's fair to say, like, OKC did this to Ant too. Like, it's who they are, and it's easy to criticize Halliburton, say wake up at the start of the game. They're 7-1 when he scores 20 points, and in wins he's like 21 points, 10 assists, and losses he's like 11 points, 5 assists. So is this something that Indiana needs to look at as far as getting him going early, or is this just kind of like you tip your cap to the best defensive team we've seen in maybe 10, 15 years in OKC?
I mean, Halliburton had 21 and 11 against the Thunder during the regular season. That sounds great, but it's a 2-game total. I mean, dude, when you're dealing with Lou Dort or Alex, or, if it's not him, it's Caruso or it's Casey Wallace, and maybe you get switched down to a Jalen Williams. That's tough, and they've made him play in the half court. Halliburton had one transition play with the ball in his hands in game two, rather. One. It was a turnover. For Tyrese Halliburton not to generate a single point in transition for an entire game, that's a problem for the Pacers. If they can't get out and run, it's going to be really, really hard for them to score with any level of efficiency. And, credit to OKC. They make that very difficult. And I do think that has a lot to do with Mark Daigneault's decision not to play the two bigs together. They did for, I think, 5 minutes in game two, but they've only played together for 5 minutes in this series. And, I think he probably watched the Eastern Conference Finals, looked at how badly the Knicks struggled in transition, how many Pascal Siakam buckets were just him being fast and, getting the look-ahead pass and finishing, and decided, hey, priority number one is going to be taking away transition from the Pacers, who have a great engine to that offense in Halliburton, who plays fast as any team in the league. And again, if you take that away from them, they're not a team that's going to be able to grind out good possession after good possession in the half court against this defense when it's set.
I thought we would actually see, to your point about the two bigs, I thought Daigneault would go away from it in game two, which he did not do. Did that surprise you after they lost game one?
Well, again, you said you thought he'd play them together a lot in game two, or that he would stay away from it?
I thought maybe we'd see more of them together only because they lost game one.
Yeah. I think he had good reasons for that. I think it's something where he doesn't want to play those guys together when Halliburton and Siakam are on the court, because those guys obviously are as good as it gets in the league at creating transition opportunities. They play together for 5 minutes, but I think he was pretty confident that his decision was the right one in game one. And again, you can criticize, he changed the starting lineup, and he'd have the same starting lineup for every playoff game before that, and you're blinking first, and you can criticize all those things. It's not like the start is what cost them in that game. They fell apart in the last 5 minutes, or really the last 3 minutes of that game. So I think he looked at it and said, okay, all the reasons we decided to do this in the days between the series still hold up, so we're going to stick with it.
Do you think, look, at this point, adjustments or schematic approaches that are different, or even rotational decisions, like you're in the NBA Finals. You're 3 wins away from being a world champ. But is there anything that you've seen that Indiana can do that gives them a better chance to make the rest of the series interesting? Does Rick shrink his rotation? I don't know, because it's June. Like, these two teams are who they are. But can Indiana do anything to maybe extend this series longer than most people think?
I don't underestimate Rick Carlisle.
Sure.
I don't underestimate his ability to come up with solutions. Rick's a lot smarter than I am, because I'm struggling to see what those solutions might be.
Sure. All right, before I set you loose, what does your gut tell you about tomorrow? Does Indiana get the proverbial game 3 at home?
Well, you know what? This is interesting. The Thunder have stunk in game 3.
They have, yeah.
During this postseason. They're 1-2, and they had to come back from 29 down after John Morant got hurt. So that's a trend that I would recommend that the Thunder would be determined to end. Again, I think they are the better team by a significant margin. I think that they just present matchup problems that are going to be very tough for the Pacers to solve. But we'll see. There's going to be the energy of the crowd, and especially if the Pacers can give this crowd some reason to sustain that energy early on, then we might have a good game on our hands.
All right, my guy. Well, enjoy Indianapolis. Glad you've traveled safely. Thank you for the time today, and we'll chat soon.
Hey, you'll appreciate this. Guess where we are having a pickup hoops run tonight?
What do we got? Hoosiers, Jim?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Fieldhouse.
that a boy. Is McTenseed playing with you?
Oh, he's the one who, Scott Agnes, who's local guy up here, and McTen are the ones who made sure that we were able to make this happen. So, looking forward to that. Hopefully, I'll be able to walk up right at the end. 4
passes before you shoot it. You know the rules, yeah.
Sounds good.
All right, brother. Tim McMahon covers the NBA for ESPN. Always appreciate his time on Twitter at ESPN_McMahon. You can also find the link to his book that he wrote about Luka Doncic and the Curse of Greatness. And, it's been a big year for our guy. He's really kind of risen up the ranks over there. Very happy for Tim. He's been a longtime friend of the show. All right, we'll catch a break. We'll switch gears. We'll do a little college football coming up on the other side. University of Utah over the past couple of weekends has hosted a bunch of recruits, and a few of those recruits for the 2026 class signed across the dotted line. And also the latest on House v. NCAA, some comments Mark Harlan made about how Utah Athletics is set to distribute the new $20.5 million they have in salary to give to these young people who play sports for colleges. Do not call them student athletes. That's a silly made-up term. So we'll do some college football, maybe a little NFL coming up on the other side. We're back to the NBA with Brad Knight. Dave Fox stops by. Then we'll get to the 5 o'clock hour of the show on a Tuesday edition of The Drive. So keep it right here on ESPN 700. U.S. Open week, Oakmont Country Club. We'll have some local reps there. Of course, Tony Finau will be playing, as will Zach Blair and Preston Summerhays. Zach and Preston had to go through the qualifying process, which, by the way, sounds grueling. Not Zach's first rodeo. The reports are there will be a 5.5-inch rough, and the greens will be rolling out at a 14, which I can't even wrap my mind around. Scottie Scheffler is the overwhelming favorite to win this tournament. Rory McIlroy, who's coming off a situation where he did not even make the cut at the RBC Canadian Open, is the second favorite in Vegas. Rory also had a difficult PGA Championship, which he blamed on the media for reporting his driver was not allowed to be used. It's been a weird week for him. But we do have some Grand Slam golf, major championship golf coming up this weekend. It's the fourth major of the year at this Oakmont Country Club, which has a really interesting backstory. So we will get you updates as the tee times have been announced moving forward. We're going to bring in Brad Knight today, who covers the Pacers, has a Pacers podcast. We'll do some more NBA Finals. Dave Fox stops by as well. But an interesting news cycle over the course of the past, 4 or 5 days now in the world of college football. The University of Utah, this time of year, on the football side of things, is busy with recruiting for the 2026 class. And obviously, there's still a number of weeks and months until the fall time, so there'll be plenty of time to potentially add to the group for this year when the portal opens again. So it's always hard to know when it comes to these young men who have signed for the 2026 class what they're going to look like. But it has been a busy weekend. Porter, I'm not sure what sort of color or context you have for this conversation. 2 weekends ago, I read, I think it was the Trib, our guy Batacchio. I think they had over 20 prospects on campus. Last weekend, it was a little bit more quiet, maybe 8 or 9 kids on campus. But any color or context on kind of just the endeavor that Coach Witt and his staff have right now to try to add other pieces for the 2026 class? They signed a 3-star running back today named LaMarcus Bell. And again, trying to analyze these kids when they're not going to be on campus for a year sometimes is tough. But you've got good insight up there. What do the last few weekends have looked like as far as your understanding of it?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned with LaMarcus, that's kind of the big one as of late. Preston Pitts, a recent commit, Michael Johnson right there. Sorry, excuse me, Gary Mitchell, another one that they've already got for that next year class that we're now kind of focusing on. Can't really zero in on names, obviously, because they're unofficial until Utah actually does something on paper with them. But from what I heard from folks on the Hill over the last couple of weeks, Spence, they have had a really, really good, feeling about what they did over the last little cycle. The players they picked up for 2026. I'll just say they didn't have to, miss on a guy and then go fill that scholarship with someone else. They're striking on players that they are going after aggressively, and Phil to be in a really, really good spot. A lot of momentum, it seems like, and on the offensive side of the football as well.
They also landed a commitment from a quarterback for the 2026 class named Michael Johnson. And it's interesting when you kind of read a little bit about who Michael Johnson is as a quarterback for the Utes. He sounds a lot like Devin Dampier as far as the way they play. Obviously, Jason Beck takes over as the new offensive coordinator, and Devin Dampier has been signed as the presumptive starter for the program. And maybe, Porter, this is just kind of the way that Jason wants to play. Maybe when it comes to this approach, because if you read about this Michael Johnson kid, he is a true dual threat for 2026. Apparently, he can really go as far as rushing the football. Obviously, he can throw it too. But maybe this is Jason Beck's MO, and maybe these are the types of quarterbacks we'll see as long as Jason's the offensive coordinator.
Well, yeah, obviously, we always kind of assume there's going to be a specific way that Utah football plays, and I still think that will be true in 2025 and 2026. They're going to run the football a lot. They're going to try to play defense, and if they have a 10-point lead, you're going to see a slow version of football. Kyle Whittingham is still in that locker room, right? But that doesn't mean the offense is always going to be the exact same. Even though it has similarities through a lot of Whittingham offensive coordinators. Look at a Troy Taylor offense versus an Andy Ludwig offense versus a Norm Chow offense. They're all pretty different in a lot of ways. And Jason Beck's is, you go back to New Mexico, to his time in New Mexico and other stops, it's pretty consistent, right, of the kind of football he wants to play. And one of those elements is usually a quarterback who can do multiple things, including make some plays with his legs. And I think that that lines up exactly with what Utah wants to do. Now, the question is, can you run your quarterback a lot, stay healthy, keep a balanced offense, and still have a passing attack, Spence, that is threatening enough to not make you one-dimensional? It's going to be the topic for Utah football once again in 2025. I think pretty much how it's been for decade and a half or so.
So let's move over into this space because, Porter, we were talking about this during Crosstalk. So, of course, right after we signed off the show on Friday, I get an alert on my phone that House v. NCAA has been pushed across the line. We thought it was going to come maybe in March or April. It had to be finalized prior to this July deadline when athletic departments and institutions were going to be able to start distributing the funds to these athletes that play sports in college. And so $20.5 million, okay, is essentially the figure that will be allowed to be distributed to athletes over the course of the next fiscal year until June of next season. And Sean and I, during Crosstalk today, discussed and if you're not listening to Sean's show, he is killing it right now. So definitely check out the Sean O'Connell show, which supersedes us here in the afternoons. He brought up the dynamic, and, Mark Harlan gave a couple of different comments, and both the Trib and the D-News picked some of this stuff up, about how the funds should be allocated. And certainly, as a sports talk radio host, that's above my pay grade, and that's up to Mark and his staff. So I find this to be really interesting. So this is separate from NIL distribution. This is what schools can actually now pay players to play sports in college. And, last year, when you look at some of the figures, Dan Wetzel wrote a piece for ESPN.com, and he sat down with Greg Byrne, who's the athletic director from Alabama. And I can't really draw a parallel between Bama's revenue generation and the University of Utah because I don't have Utah's figures in front of me. But football last year for Bama made $26.4 million. Men's basketball made $5.9 million. Every other program lost millions of dollars. Women's basketball lost $4.2 million at Alabama last year. So department expenses, according to this interview that Greg gave to Dan Wetzel, $262.8 million, and the revenue was $234.8, and that's a $28 million deficit, but it is up $13 million prior. And basically that's because Saban retired, and they didn't have to pay him as much. They didn't have to pay the new, obviously they didn't have to, pay Saban's contract anymore. So I do think there's this misnomer that people believe, athletic departments are making money hand over fist. And some of the TV contracts that will kick in and continue to kick in, and, the Big 12 was able to distribute a good amount of money, and Utah is a full share member. I believe BYU will be in 2 years. Does BYU get their full share next year in 2 years?
I believe after the next reset of calendar academic year.
Okay, so BYU's on their way to becoming a full share member. Utah was a full share member from day one, which of course did not land well down in Provo. And Porter, I'm honestly conflicted here because we have to be honest and front-facing and grown up about the way this business is set up and the way that it works and the way that the revenue is generated. And just strictly from a business standpoint, it just makes fiscal sense to invest the funds you're now allowed to pay players into the products that bring in the most revenue. And by that, essentially, it's football by a landslide, and then it's men's basketball right after that. But there's also a very fair dynamic here in play that other sports have not received the same type of investment that football and men's basketball has received. There's also a dynamic in play that women's soccer and volleyball or whatever, baseball, like everyone does deserve a piece of the pie, right? So there's a tricky little balance between investing in sports and in young people that play these sports in a way that maybe they've never been invested in before in order to give them equal footing. I believe in that. I really do. But I'm also a grown-up, and I understand how business works. And if you suddenly have this cash infusion that you're able to distribute, it only makes fiscal sense to invest a good portion of that money into the products that are actually bringing in revenue that ultimately support the entire endeavor. So I don't know if you have a ratio in mind. We were talking about 65 to 70% of the funds going to football. And then what is that, 15, 20 or whatever going to men's basketball. But that doesn't leave a very big piece of the pie for everybody else. I will say this. I don't know how ultimately, like if we saw the Mark Harlan pie chart, I don't know how this is going to be distributed, or I don't know how this is going to be cut up. I would imagine a good portion of it will go to the football program. But you've got to do something about the fact that we are approaching now a decade between NCAA appearances for men's basketball. Because if you're a P4 program, if you're in a P4 conference like Utah is, like BYU is, and your men's basketball team is not making the tournament consistently, you are leaving a huge portion of revenue on the table. So, again, I don't know what the split's going to look like, but I would imagine Alex Jensen did not take this job without some sort of assurance from Mark he's going to have his back economically.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be an assurance there. And, I mean, the thing for Utah is they're in a unique position where they have historically 3 sports that bring in revenue, if you include the gymnastics team, right? That is actually a situation where Mark Harlan might have a unique position that a lot of other schools really don't have, where you have a little bit more, it's not a lot of the wiggle room, right? I think you're going to put a lot of that revenue into the moneymaker, which is the football team, but you might have a little bit of wiggle room having, one of your other main sports going into the green in many years. And, what does the ratio look like? I'm not sure. I probably think, Spence, a good portion, almost all of that 20.5 is going to go to football. And then you focus on fundraising, you focus on your boosters, you focus on your Crimson Club folks, your Ken Garfs, your Huntsmans, your Eccles. That's where I think you're going to try to really get over the top, right? The cherry on top that is going to get your other sports across the finish line and in a place where they can operate. But that being said, this is the reality that we talked about 2, 3, 4 years ago when we said, okay, if you don't like everything the NCAA is doing, which is a completely fair place to be, that's fine. But if we cross this lexicon, we are now going into a point where the model that we had, which is making it possible for water polo teams, for golf teams, for ski teams sometimes to even exist, that model's gone. And as much as we will see some schools figure it out and navigate it, we're going to see mistakes happen, and we're going to see programs lost because of it. That's where we are. We've seen it already. It's going to be interesting, but I do think Utah is in a unique position to be in a good position. And on BYU, back to that, just to clarify, they have had their last unequal revenue sharing on the Big 12 side. The next one will be full.
All right, gotcha. I mean, Utah's already cut their beach volleyball program. Of course, that upset some people. Some tough decisions are going to have to be made. Roster limits are changing. The NIL portion of this will be fascinating. Ross Dellinger has reported, based off of, and this is still very loose because the NCAA cannot legislate any of this. They cannot enforce any of the rules. There's a new commission that it will be in charge of enforcing that. And we'll see what sort of success they have with that endeavor now that there is this other portion of leadership involved. So just a few hours after the settlement was approved on Friday, a guy named Brian Seeley, who is a high-level executive in Major League Baseball, has been named CEO of a new enforcement organization, which is called the College Sports Commission. And his job will lead the team responsible for enforcement of the new rules around rev sharing, third-party payments to players for NIL deals and roster limits. But the complication is with this new setup, with the way it's kind of structured according to the information we have at hand, according to Ross Dellinger, 70% of NIL payments a year ago would have been deemed illegal under the new structure. Okay, so we'll see how that changes moving forward. I mean, one of the pieces of good news here is now that it's just more of a straightforward, the $20.5 million from the schools to be able to pay the young people who play sports. It should eliminate all of the seedy backroom, like the University of Miami stuff. It really should eliminate most of. Now, that will never fully go away if we're going to be adults here and have an honest conversation about backroom handshake deals and bags of cash or whatever. Like stuff like that will probably always go down no matter what you do. But NIL deals now are going to be sent through a clearinghouse managed by the accounting firm Deloitte, who, by the way, run the NBA draft lottery, not very popular around here. And they're going to assess those deals, and they have the ability to approve or deny each NIL deal according to if it meets what they're deeming fair market value. But again, these are platitudes with no hard definitions. There are so many pieces of information that seem to be still very ambiguous, in my opinion. So Deloitte's trying to establish what's called a true NIL, an attempt to ensure companies aren't overpaying for a player's services to help their school. Again, according to Ross Dellinger, Deloitte officials shared data with P4 administration that revealed 70% of the current NIL deals from boosters would have been denied in the upcoming system. And the responsibility of paying players, what a school thinks it needs to be paid to remain on their team, falls on the athletic department, which, by the way, is why Utah moved their official collective in-house. And that's a recent thing. So it's a new program for athletes to be connected with brands that want to do NIL deals, which is called Elevate You. Okay, so that's one of the initiatives that Utah's put in place. Mark Harlan wrote a letter that was posted on the school's website. And let's just get into a couple of pieces of what Mark had to say before we catch a break, and we'll do some NBA coming up with Brad Knight, who has a Pacers podcast. Okay, so a couple of pieces from Mark's letter to provide a little bit of clarity of where Mark is at with this entire endeavor. Quote, "We're all in on investing up to the maximum allowable in revenue share, which is approximately $20.5 million for 25-26, though we are finalizing our plans for how the revenue will be shared. We will also add 23 new scholarships with a total value of $1.15 million, implement NIL contracts between the institution and student athletes, and expand student-athlete endorsement opportunities with businesses and organizations." And that's where the community comes in, right? And that's always been the interesting piece of this conversation, to try to get some clarity and insight on what it looks like locally. Because I think what we've learned so far, and I'm telling you, I talked about this the day after this news broke, not the House NCAA settlement. The day after it became a reality that players were able to receive NIL checks, I said on the show, this is great news for BYU. And it's turned out on the basketball side to be just that. I don't have up-to-date numbers on this, but a few months ago, I was contacted by somebody who would very much know, and I'll leave it at that. They told me at the time BYU had 9 seven-figure donors and Utah had 2. That information was updated by the same source about a month and a half ago that said BYU now has 11 seven-figure donors and Utah has 3. I don't have any hard data in front of me to indicate that. It's just from a source from somebody who's with the institution, somebody who would know. And so when it comes to Mark Harlan's desire to create synergistic partnerships with the community, this is going to come down to business owners and deep-pocketed donors that care about Utah athletics. And I'm telling you, if you're one of these people that are fortunate enough to own a business or you have some means and you care about the future of Utah athletics, I would contact the athletic department, get involved, because that's what BYU has done. And it's not just Ryan Smith and Danny Ainge. It's a number of Silicon Slopes bros that probably have bedazzled jeans and wear their hat backwards and just down swig all day, but they're very rich and they care about BYU athletics. And they've allocated their resources, which, again, feels a little bit disproportionate. I've continued to wonder where Kalani is at with all of this, based off some of the reporting from the Salt Lake Tribune about the Royal Blue Collective cutting payments to football players last year after a rough season. But, of course, last year was a really good year, so maybe that's changed this season. I don't have any information there, but what we do know is Kevin Young is being paid a lot of money, and he may be getting more cash than Kalani, which is rare in the P4 landscape, to be paying your basketball coach more than your football coach. We know that A.J. DeBanza, the reports are $7 million for 5 months of basketball. That comes from Jeff Goodman himself. And when you do some of the other math with some of the other basketball players that have transferred, BYU is paying in the neighborhood of $13 to $15 million for their basketball roster this year. And those are NIL payments. That's not money that's coming from the school. So that even gives BYU another ace in the hole. And, of course, there are far more players on a football team than there are on a basketball team. So if you did the final figure and added up all the money that every single football player is receiving juxtaposed to the basketball team, it probably does come out on the other side for the football program. But back to the point about Mark's comments of one of their endeavors is to, quote, expand endorsement opportunities with businesses and organizations. That's where our community in Salt Lake is really going to have to step up. And it's why every time a college coach is out in public speaking to the community, speaking to the Chamber of Commerce or businesses or what have you, they all talk about the same thing, and that's the need for donations and the need for businesses to partner up and be willing to get involved to distribute some NIL funds to these young people that play sports for the institution that you care about. So Mark goes on to talk about Elevate U. He says, quote, through our existing Elevate U program, we have increased our investment with the addition of a brand strategy and governance team dedicated to providing Utah student athletes comprehensive support as they build their brand, enter into non-exclusive contracts for limited use rights for their NIL and profits. Last year, Mark hired Patrick Nolan, is the school's chief revenue officer, who was with Notre Dame. And Patrick's job is to find creative ways to increase revenue at the University of Utah. The creative ways are donations from companies and individuals that care about Utah, that own businesses or have deep pockets. So ultimately, we'll see how this endeavor moves forward. And I'm sure we'll get some information soon about how this pie will be divvied up. It's probably safe to assume that the majority of it will go to the football program, which generates the revenue. And you can roll your eyes at that if you'd like. You can say it's unfair. That's fine. That's fine. And again, there's a portion of me that believes that some of these other programs that historically speaking have not received the same investment deserve their due. So this is a complicated thing. It's a new dance you have to dance as an administrator in college athletics. Mark's got his work cut out for him. We've got Big 12 Media Day coming up. Sean and I will be down on location for that. So excited for that. We'll do more on this a little bit later on. Dave Fox will roll by, but we'll catch a quick break. 2 hours down, 2 hours to go. Coming up next, Brad Knight stops by to talk a little NBA Finals. So don't go anywhere. Keep it right here on The Drive with Spence Checketts on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. We are 92.1 FM. We are proud to be part of Utah's ESPN radio network. All right, we got Dave Fox rolling by today. Dave will join us in studio. Are we getting Dave Fox in studio today? Do we know if Dave's walking over here?
I think so.
All right.
I believe so.
Well, he should. It's hot out, but he can walk 2 blocks to hang out with us. I'll be on TV with Dave tonight at 10:35 on KMYU, so join us for that. If you missed Iron Eagle, great stuff earlier. Tim McMahon rolled by as well. Did a little college football last segment, but let's get back to the NBA as the NBA Finals resumes tomorrow. And Game 3 will be in Indiana for the first time since 2000. Indiana hosts an NBA Finals game. Our next guest hosts the Pacers Post-Up podcast. He is Brad Knight on a Tuesday afternoon. Brad, happy Tuesday, sir. How are you?
Spence, I'm doing great. Certainly appreciate you having me on here.
No, I appreciate the time. So let's just start with the buzz in your city. We are a city that has not had an NBA Finals game since 1998. So we are also a long-suffering basketball market, and it's been a while. So what's it like downtown? People ready for tomorrow?
There's no doubt about it. You know, they say in 49 other states it's just basketball, but this is Indiana, and I will tell you this fan base is rallying around that mantra, if you will. Obviously, the past couple of years with an Eastern Conference Finals run last season, everything that has been going on with the Indiana Fever, Caitlin Clark, et cetera. The city's out. There's Pacers jerseys abound. Anytime you go out in public, it's all people are talking about. So we're just trying to soak it in. It's been a lot of fun, and we're looking forward to, obviously, Game 3 and Game 4 here Wednesday and Friday night.
So, look, it's not breaking news that Rick can coach. I mean, we've all known it for a long time. He's won an NBA championship. This might be his Symphony 41, though. I mean, nobody had Indiana going to the finals. And to be fair, they were an Eastern Conference Finals team a year ago. The Vegas odds certainly not near on their side. I think they start 10-15. So my question to you, Brad, is at what juncture during the season did you start seeing something that felt real?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I would tell you there was a game against Charlotte in early December that I would tell you was really rock bottom for this Pacers team. And we started the year 10-15, so it was not the start we were looking for coming off of that Eastern Conference Finals appearance. There were injuries and things like that were starting to play a factor. But really, I would tell you, is after that, we got Andrew Nembhard back in the lineup. We started to get a little bit of health. And the team started to take defense more seriously. And I would tell you, for anybody that was paying attention to this season, this team in the off season leading up to this 24-25 campaign, you mentioned Rick Carlisle. It was all he was preaching was defense. We obviously had one of the more prolific offenses last year, and we could put points on the board, but we couldn't get stops. And so you mentioned this being Carlisle's symphony. Really, it is the movement from a bottom 5 or 10 defense to a top 10 or 15 defense throughout this season that has allowed this Pacers team to kind of sneak up on the rest of the NBA because people thought we were fun, move the ball, shoot a lot of threes. But once we started defending, that's when we became a serious contender. And obviously it's paid off here with the trip to the finals, as you referenced, first time in 25 years for us.
So we had Eddie Gill on yesterday. Eddie played his college ball out this way and, of course, is on the broadcast side of things for the Pacers now. I'm going to ask you a couple of the questions I kind of kicked the tires with him on. And, look, I am a lifelong fan of the New York Knicks, and so no part of me will cheer for the Pacers. Respectfully, Reggie Miller, the whole thing. Tyrese is doing the choke sign at MSG, and I'm like, dude, this team again. But tremendous respect for the main dynamic that stands out to me with them, and that is, it sounds simplistic, Brad, but look, in this league, I see it all the time where a team is down. There's not a lot of time left. They look up at the clock and they say, okay, 1, 2, 3 Cancun. It's not happening tonight. This group never does that. And that game 1 comeback against New York at the Garden, I said the next day that I don't know that you can come back from a situation like that where you just collapse historically in front of your home crowd. And I'm not saying that's the only reason the Pacers won. They deserved to advance. They were the better team. But what do you most attribute this attitude, this desire where it's like it doesn't matter what the score is. We are going to play as hard as we can until there's no time on the clock. And remarkable comeback after remarkable comeback. What do you attribute that to?
Yeah, a lot of people are saying team of destiny, it's luck, it's things like that. And sure, you got to have a little luck on your side to do seemingly the impossible or improbable. But I would tell you this is a locker room full of guys that are team first. You don't have a lot of egos. You have stars, but again, maybe not superstars, and everybody's been debating that about Tyrese Halliburton, but a lot of humility and a lot of guys that are bought in. They're bought into Rick Carlisle, they're bought into this city, this franchise, and most importantly, each other on the floor. And I think, for those that weren't maybe paying attention in the lead up to the postseason, the Pacers had 14 games from about mid-March through the end of the regular season where they were down double digits at some point in that game, and they won 9 of them. And there were a few that come to mind. There was a road win in Minneapolis against the Timberwolves where we won in overtime with a late game 3 from Obi Toppin. There was a game against the Bucks where Tyrese Halliburton hit a three-pointer. It was a 4-point play on what looked like kind of a spread option out of bounds call from our coaching staff. Some folks might remember that. But they made a habit of this in the regular season, these comebacks where, they're down 10, 15, 18 points, but they did it. And I think that really instilled a belief that, hey, we're going to play till the final buzzer sounds. And you saw that in game 1. We led for 0.3 seconds, and it was enough to get a victory in Oklahoma City to kick off the finals. So it's just a lot of belief right now, and I credit our entire staff and locker room for buying in.
So, obviously, as a radio host in Salt Lake City, I often try to draw parallels between whatever's going on around pro basketball and where we find ourselves with the Utah Jazz out here, which over the past few years has been hard to do because we're in the midst of a rebuild. Next year will be the 4th year since they decided to move on from Mitchell and Gobert, and Quinn Snyder left and Dennis Lindsey left, and a new ownership group came in, and Danny Ainge was hired and Will Hardy was hired, and Austin Ainge is now the president of basketball ops. So they have a coaching staff they like and a front office they trust. They just have players that are really bad at playing basketball, which is a problem if you're going to be an NBA team. So enlighten us a little bit on this project that the Indiana Pacers front office kind of took on a few years back, and how they've been able to build a roster in a small market that is now playing for an NBA championship.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I would tell you, we had some experimentation too. I am not too far removed from the Nate Bjorkgren days with the double big lineup. We ran Domantas Sabonis and Miles Turner together on the floor at the 4 and 5. It really never worked, and Bjorkgren was only around for 1 season. A lot of fans would say thankfully, but this front office went out. It started with Rick Carlisle. They got a coach who understood this city, understood what basketball meant. And then the move to get Halliburton was really what kickstarted it all. We moved on from Domantas. We put Miles Turner at the position that he is most comfortable playing, which is that stretch 5, somebody who can shoot, mid-range out to 3-point range and obviously defends the rim well. And then it was the in-season tournament run last year that I think told our front office, hey, we have something here. Halliburton is a rising star in this league, and everybody is playing better around him. And that's when you saw us go get aggressive on the trade market. We bring in an all-NBA caliber player, all-star in Pascal Siakam, and that was the push. That was really the kind of, I don't want to say all-in because we're not a market of all-in moves, but you now have Tyrese and Siakam on long-term deals. We went in this offseason. Nembhard and Nesmith are on under contract for a couple more years. Those were guys that were maybe underappreciated, but certainly the front office saw guys that had fight, hustle, and they are 2 of our, in the trenches guys, if you will, certainly on the defensive end of the floor, and they've had their moments offensively this postseason. But it's really getting a lot of guys that other teams gave up on. Or maybe didn't see what we saw in them, and it's come together now in a fashion that we're a heck of a lot of fun to watch and a hard team to keep up with how much ball movement, pace, and space we bring to the game. Did
the fan base remain committed and patient, or were their natives getting restless? I mean, so far out here, we have, like I said earlier, we have 3 years of this new project where the Jazz broke down a really good team. It's funny, Brad, I kept hearing this thing this year. And I want to be clear, I'm not calling Donovan Mitchell Luka Doncic. I'm not. But I kept hearing people say, no team will trade a 25-year-old superstar player in his prime. I'm like, well, we did out here, And the wild thing about this finals matchup is Y'all technically turned Paul George into Tyrese Halliburton in a roundabout way, and OKC turned Paul George into SGA and other pieces, Jalen too. And I don't know that the Jazz got enough for Donovan if we juxtapose it to the stars that other teams have received from star players. Maybe Paul George was better than Donovan when he was traded twice, but Lowry's a nice player, but he's not Halliburton and he's not SGA for sure. So 3 years in, the fan base appears to be remaining patient. The building continues to be full. It doesn't feel the same way because they're watching an inferior product, and our TV ratings actually did dip this year. So we'll see what happens as we enter year 4. But did the Pacer fans remain committed and loyal and patient, or were people ready for something different after a few years of mediocre basketball?
I would tell you if there was a dip, it was small. The Indiana fan base is pretty darn committed to this team. We kicked off the call talking about, in 49 other states, and that really does ring true. This is a proud franchise and a really proud fan base that loves to get behind their Pacers. But I would be lying if I said that the buildings weren't a little lighter. I go to every game, and there were nights where maybe we're playing against somebody that's at the bottom of the league, the Washington Wizards or something like that, and you see a lot of empty seats when the team isn't playing well. So I think as a fan, you want the most out of your guys. You want to believe that you have an opportunity to compete for a championship. But I will tell you this, our fan base is not they're not taking this moment lightly. I think everybody has gotten behind this team over the last couple of years and for the most part stuck through it in the hard times. And that's what you like to see, particularly in small markets, because, OKC is an example of this. And that team got moved. And I don't know what was all behind that, but you never want to take having a team for granted because it can go other places. And I know the Thunder fans are grateful to have one in OKC, but Seattle's sitting there and hasn't had a team for, 10 plus years. So it's just something that I would say I'll give Indiana credit for weathering the storm a little bit over the last couple of seasons.
Let me ask you this, because the other thing that we have dealt with here really ever since John Stockton and Karl Malone retired is the best players the Jazz have been able to draft or acquire have either left on their own accord or have essentially forced their way out. Like, it's no secret that Donovan was ready to find another place to play and live in a different city, quite frankly. Darren Williams, Jerry Sloan got loose. D. Will gets traded to Brooklyn. They elect to move on from Gobert because they broke the whole thing down. Gordon Hayward broke everyone's heart out here on July 4th a number of years ago. So we've had these glimpses of like, okay, we've got something here. And then the ending has just been premature and also very instant and tough for fans to stomach around here. So how sustainable do you think this group is? Like, do you feel like this group is committed to living in Indiana, playing for the Pacers? Does it feel like this could be the beginning of a 4 or 5 year window where you guys can make deep runs every year?
Yeah, Spence, for us fans and those that cover and watch this team closely, it's the first time we've felt like that in a long time.
Okay.
And I will tell you that because you think about, you mentioned Paul George and the Paul George trade. It was obviously Sabonis and Oladipo that we parlay into Halliburton. But we had a similar story. Paul George made it vocal that he did not want to be here. And we all remember how that went down. We got Oladipo for a year or two. He had an injury, and then he made it be known that he didn't want to be in Indiana anymore. And he ends up, getting traded. I will give Kevin Pritchard and Chad Buchanan, our front office, a lot of credit for always finding a way to get some value for these guys. But Tyrese Halliburton really is the first guy that has come here and said, no, I want to be here. And he's a Midwest guy, grew up in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, played his ball at Iowa State, not too far, west of Indiana. He's a Midwest. He's got that, kind of vibe to him. And he signed on the dotted line 5 years. And he has talked over and over about how he wants to cement his legacy as a Pacer. I think he felt a certain type of way when Sacramento traded him. And really he values the loyalty, the two-way street of loyalty. And I think fans are excited about what that can mean for him sticking around long term. Siakam comes here, and he told our front office when he got traded here, he wanted to get a long-term deal done. I think a lot of people forget when we traded for him, it was on an expiring contract, and we had to still find a way to make that work in the offseason, and we signed him to a 4-year, almost $200 million deal. So our two franchise pillars right now are locked in on the same timeline for the next 4 years. And I do think that opens a title window for us. You know, Shams Charania was on the Pat McAfee show saying Indianapolis is a destination. I don't know if I go that far. It's still Indianapolis, and I've lived here most of my life. It's a great city, but it doesn't give you the allure of an LA or a Boston, New York, Miami. But I think guys see that Tyrese makes everybody else around him better. And so I do think there's something to be said for that, and I think that helps keep this window open for us for a couple of years.
All right. I don't know if I'm a glutton for punishment. I do not believe I'm a masochist, but I do want to ask a question of how nice it was for that fan base to watch the Pacers eliminate my Knicks.
Yeah, I'll take it easy on you here. It was pretty darn awesome. You know, I listen, the storied rivalry, obviously, anybody that wants to talk Pacers with me, I'm like, hey, go watch Winning Time first, and then we'll talk. The Reggie Miller 30 for 30 documentary on ESPN. It's a great rivalry. It really is. And it's, you know, Hicks versus Knicks. We know all the storylines, but really to do it on the home floor, to be in the building that night, it was a heck of a lot of fun. It felt like a lot of demons being exercised, and really it was a great series. You know, I think unfortunately it came down to some late game heroics in that first contest that really set the tone. The Knicks should be, I think, very proud of their season and optimistic for the future, although I'm not sure what you make of the Thibodeau firing. I did not see that coming, but it was a great series, and I actually expect to see more playoff matchups in the future against the Knicks because I think they're going to be strong here for the next couple of years as well.
It is a fun rivalry, you know, with all the history and the dynamics and the dichotomies between the two markets and the differences, you know. So I hope that this could be the beginning of another, you know, 4, 5, 6 year run where both teams are really good. At some point, it would be nice if the Knicks could actually figure it out. The Tom thing, like, I am disgusted that they went in that direction. I understand the dynamic of, you know, potentially believing that you maybe had a little more meat on the bone, and that collapse in game one was tough. And honestly, you know, in my opinion, Brad, I do think Rick outcoached him in the Eastern Conference Finals, but I think he outcoached Missoula, right? And they beat Boston. Nobody thought that they would. So I thought that they were ahead of schedule. But since we're in this space, what did you make of that coaching matchup in the Eastern Conference Finals between Rick and Tom?
Yeah, you know, my brother and I who host the podcast, we do a series preview episode, and I'll be transparent. We gave the edge to Carlisle early on, and I think that is what ended up playing out. You know, I don't want to say Thibodeau was grasping at straws. That's too aggressive. But anytime that you make a coach change their starting lineup, a lineup that went 82 games and got them to the Eastern Conference Finals, I think maybe you have them on their heels a little bit. Thibodeau went deeper into his bench than I think any of us expected. Again, I don't know if that was just trying to give his guys a little bit of extra blow or find a lineup that could work. You know, the Karl Anthony Towns with the bench minutes were really strong against us, so it's hard to knock it. But I do feel like that Tibbs was outcoached a little bit in that series. But it's really not a discredit to Thibodeau. I think it's more a credit to Rick Carlisle and maybe how underappreciated he is as a basketball mind and somebody that's had success now in a number of different stops, a championship-winning, you know, player and coach, and he's knocking on the door here of another one with a second team. So I was stunned by the Thibodeau firing, and I did not think it was deserved, even if he did get out-coached in the conference finals. So
tell me how you guys in Indiana and on your pod, on your show, have kind of digested the narratives and the conversation surrounding Halliburton. It's like, I don't do first take, hot take radio. And so the whole, like, is he a superstar? Like, he's an Olympian. He's been an all-star. If you watch basketball, you know that he's really good. He was all NBA third team twice. Like, this is not some new player that's burst on the scene. And then the athletic piece comes out where his peers have called him overrated. And of course that leads to the whole, like, what's your definition of a superstar? Okay, that's fine. He's awesome. And I think he's proven everybody that he's legitimately a cornerstone for a franchise. There are certain games like game 2 where you're just kind of like, all right, where are we at here? And you can't wait until the fourth to get going when you're down 20 points. But he also is not necessarily a Shea, SGA type, you know, we're going to go get 30, 35 every night. That's not who he is, and that's fine. He doesn't have to be that. But what's it been like in your market to kind of just digest the way that people have spoken about Tyrese throughout this run? Yeah, it's a really great question, and it's obviously been a hot topic. I would tell you the fan base
wants to run to his defense over and over again. And he's our star, right? For Indiana Pacers fans, he's our star. Call him a star, a superstar, whatever it may be. Games like Game 2 in this series are why it's hard sometimes to always jump to his defense, because he has what appears to be these disappearing acts. And it's not just happened, once or twice. It's happened on a consistent basis with him. And that's something that, he doesn't shy away from it in the media, which I always appreciate. He's willing to talk about it. He will get behind the microphone after a clunker and say, hey, I've got to be better. Here's what happened. Here's what I'm going to try and do next game. And by and large, he's bounced back really well. But I think for the national audience and folks that maybe haven't watched him play, he doesn't have the aesthetic of a traditional or prototypical NBA superstar. You said it. He's not going to drop 35 points every game like SGA is probably going to do in this series. He doesn't have the Steph Curry or Kyrie Irving handle. But I can tell you this. In the playoffs, the Pacers are 10-0 when Tyrese Haliburton has 10 or more assists. So when he is doing his thing as the maestro of this offense, moving the ball, getting people involved, we win basketball games. And I think ultimately for us, that's why we think he's a superstar, because he does it just about as well as anybody in the league. It's a lot of fun. It's an up and down, high tempo pace, and he can have games where he'll get 30 plus. And I think about Game 4 in the Cavs series where he, has the historic, it was 30, 15, 10, and no turnovers. So he has his superstar moments, but a lot of it is just getting other guys involved. He's at his best when the rest of the team is playing well, and that's not exactly how the prototypical NBA superstar is thought of.
All right, Brad, before I set you loose, I picked OKC in 5 because everybody did, right? Like, that's not a hot take.
Yep.
And, I don't know how much OKC basketball you watched this year. You're in the East, they're in the West. Game 2 was like, okay, that's exactly who they are. It was actually boring. Honestly, Game 1 was better because Game 2 was just a thunder, just a very OKC game at home this year. They've done that to everybody. But Indiana comes home with a split, and I've been in that building multiple times for playoff games. I know what it's going to sound like tomorrow night. So my question before I set you loose on this Tuesday is, what was your lean to start the series, and have you seen anything over the first 2 games that has changed your mind?
It's a really good question. I'll tell you, I went on a crossover pod with the OKC guys, and I picked the Pacers in 6. And Spence, I'll be honest with you, I am a hometown bias observer. So I don't have any – I'm unapologetically a homer, and I'm going to stick with Pacers in 6. I thought Game 1 was going to be crucial, and we've won every Game 1 thus far in the postseason. OKC, and I have watched a lot of their tape this year. They're awesome. They are absolutely phenomenal. When they get all their parts singing, in together, it's a beautiful thing to watch, particularly on the defensive end. But I really think we have an opportunity, particularly with shot making, to win out. We were ice cold in the first half in Game 2, and I will credit OKC. Their ball pressure absolutely had something to do with that. But I felt like we were getting good looks, and we just weren't knocking them down. We ended up shooting 34, 31, 57. Those were our shooting splits at halftime in Game 2. It's really uncharacteristic of what we've done this entire postseason. We came into this series shooting over 50% from the field, over 40% from deep. I know that is a unpopular take around the country right now. I think anybody that's picking OKC is totally well within their right mind, but I'm sticking to Pacers in 6. I understand the ball pressure is a thing, but I trust our coaching staff, and I think Tyrese Haliburton will rise above a Game 2 clunker, and we're going to see him look to get his teammates involved. They've stolen home court advantage in this series, and we've been really strong. We've only lost 3 on the home court this entire postseason. I think we find a way to get it done in Game 6.
I'd much rather see as much basketball possible. So while I picked OKC in 5, I'd love a 70-game series, and I don't have a dog in the fight. Even as a Knicks fan, I can admit to being happy for the city. I have a brother and sister-in-law in Carmel, and so they go to Pacers games. Oh, nice. Very nice. Yeah. So I'm actually going to visit there in August. I've never visited there before. But I bring that up because I actually wanted to ask you one more question. Do you have just a minute? Can I ask you one more?
Yeah.
So,
please.
So they have 6 kids. They have 2 daughters, and their daughters are obsessed with Caitlin. Like, it is, they go to all the games. They have the jerseys. What has that experience been like for y'all with her really landing there. And prior to landing there when she was in college, she's changed the landscape of the interest of women's hoops. What's that experience like for you guys back there?
It's been phenomenal. I mean, really, for a basketball town, a basketball state, to have this wave really hit us and head on, and we're just riding it as a fan base. It's so cool to see all the Fever players. They come to the Pacers games. The Pacers guys are going to the Fever games. Caitlin is phenomenal in the community. I mean, she has navigated this media firestorm, I think, about as classy as you possibly could. And then you see it on the court, and she's taken, 32-foot three-pointers. It's unbelievable, really, what she has brought. Her style of play is exactly what this fan base enjoys watching. So to see her wave kind of come along this finals run here with the Indiana Pacers, I would just tell you the fan base is elated. And we say it on our show all the time. Do not take any of this for granted, because we have been in a city where, I think about Malice in the Palace all those years ago. This stuff doesn't come around very often. So I think everybody in this town is just trying to enjoy it while they can. She's been phenomenal, and I would look for the Fever to be making a strong push. I know she's been a little bit banged up to start this season, but they made some moves this offseason, both in the coaching staff, front office, and certainly, in that locker room, that I think position them to be competing for a title this year too.
Where can people go find the podcast, Brad?
Yeah, we're at Pacers Post Up on Twitter. It's the Pacers Post Up, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. We just dropped an episode today with NBA Hall of Famer Tim Hardaway, so go check that out. He's a great interview. Really appreciated having him on, and we're going to keep covering this thing all the way to the end.
So wait, as a Knicks fan on this other side of the microphone, you as the host of a Pacers podcast had former Miami Heat point guard Tim Hardaway on your podcast? I thought we were going to be friends, Brad, and now, I don't even know what to say to you, my friend. Obviously, I kid.
Yeah.
I kid. Thank you so much for the time. Enjoy the experience. Should be fun, and I would love to get you back on, okay?
Spence, happy to join anytime. Thanks for having me. You guys have a great afternoon.
All right, Brad and I at Pacers Post Up Podcast. I cannot think of a worse scenario for me as a Knicks fan to listen to a Pacers podcast with Tim Hardaway as the guest. Tim Hardaway. Because so what you may not know, and what most listeners may not know, because it's been so long, for sure, my sports hatred in pro basketball has Miami at 1, the Miami Heat at 1, and will always be number 1. With Hardaway and Zoe and Pat Riley, like that whole group, the different level of fever pitch pressure between Knicks and Pacers after Pat Riley literally faxed his resignation to my childhood home and then left for Miami 2 weeks later. If you think I don't like the Pacers, the Heat hatred is through the roof. The Heat index they used to do, the hatred for me, through the roof.
Okay, that's fair. I always love to get the kind of generational differences. My meter probably goes, it might go Celtics, Pacers, Heat.
Oh, okay.
Right. And the Celtics thing has something to do with not just them being a Northeast rival of the Knicks, but also, winning and winning and winning and winning. That gets old.
Game 3, NBA Finals tomorrow, 6:30 Mountain Time. You can hear that game on our radio station. We will catch a quick break. Coming up on the other side, the Utah men's basketball program has finalized their roster. Another commit has been signed. We'll get to that. Dave Fox will join us, maybe live in studio. We'll get to the 5 o'clock hour of the program on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. Good to have you with us. Don't go anywhere. Keep it right here on ESPN 700. All right, we're going to bring in Dave Fox coming up in a bit. We'll bounce around on some local sports topics. I'll be on TV with Dave tonight at 10:35 on KMYU, so stay tuned for that. We've had a busy show. Tim McMahon, good stuff from Tim today. If you missed any of that, definitely check out the podcast page of the website. Talked a lot about all of these rumors flying around as it pertains to the offseason movement of what the Utah Jazz may do. According to multiple outlets, the Jazz are currently actively taking calls on both Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler, which really says a lot when you dig into it. Of course, Game 3 of the NBA Finals gets rolling tomorrow. We're just a few weeks away from the NBA Draft. We'll have great draft night coverage for you, both first and second round here on the station. So after we finish our show at 6, we'll launch right into our NBA coverage. I will anchor the coverage for the station alongside Gordy Chiesa and Richard Smith. So we will do first and second round coverage. And, of course, the NHL Draft is right after that, where the Utah Mammoth find themselves at number 4. Keanu Dawes is the first student-athlete in Utah athletics history to sign a revenue-sharing agreement. Utah will be directly paying Keanu starting July the 1st. Football will sign their deal shortly after. It is a new era of college athletics. All right, he's usually live in studio because he's usually very organized and on time and very reliable. So what is the excuse today, Mr. Dave Fox?
What? I don't know. I think there was a miscommunication.
You can throw me under the bus, Dave. Go ahead.
No! Wait, are you going to?
I'm not going to throw. I do not throw people under the bus, but there was a miscommunication. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Well, suddenly my calendar filled up for tonight. I'm not sure if I can make it over. It's unfortunate.
a big miscommunication.
No, it's all good because I cannot wait.
I'm glad we're talking hours before that appearance.
Oh, for sure, because that's what we do. No, I'm pumped tonight to answer 2 golf questions and one about the Royals. That means summer content has arrived.
I loved your text when you and I always talk before we do that segment, and I was mentioning how Timmy and now even Josh got involved in the questions, and you're right. It's June.
It sure is. No, it sure is. It's all good. U.S. Open right around the corner. Let's do a little NBA Finals. Where do you find yourself, Dave, after 2 games? I mean, everyone thought and look, I still think OKC's winning it. I picked them in 5. It feels like 6 might be the play. But after 2 games, have you changed your opinion on how this thing could play out?
No, I haven't at all. But I still. When you watch a team like Indiana start to make that comeback, you wonder what's going through the minds of the Thunder, because we've seen it the entire playoffs, and you can call a timeout. You can tell the guys, we've seen this movie before. Here's what they're going to do. And yet somehow it still happens. Blows me away. And we both watched that game. The whole world watched that game. And right down to that last, what they never even led till that last shot. It just absolutely floors me. But I do think, Spence, I will say this. I wouldn't be surprised if Indiana gets a split at home, so then we're tied after 4 games, and maybe this thing goes 7. But the good thing about that is we get extra basketball, and I love the content. I love being able to watch those games. We're all basketball fans, you and I and Porter. So keep it going as long as you can.
Yeah, and, it's interesting. My old radio partner, my buddy Gordon Monson, who joins the show for the Salt Lake Tribune, wrote a good piece that people should go read at sltrib.com about analyzing the market size of Indianapolis and Oklahoma City and juxtaposing it to Salt Lake. And, I don't know if it either excites fans or stings them that in this current landscape and ecosystem of how you can roster, construct, and pro basketball, there are so many teams in smaller markets that either currently are playing for a championship like OKC and Indianapolis, or over the past 5-6 years, Denver, Milwaukee, and the Spurs are going to be, going to be relevant for a while because they have Wembanyama. Do you think Jazz fans take more excitement that small market teams are winning championships, or does it sting that the Jazz are not close to ready to capitalize on this opportunity?
Well, I'll say 2 things on that. I don't know how many Jazz fans actually pay attention to those 2 teams and then think about their own, which they should, because it is a good model. Secondly, I know we live in a what have you done for me lately world, but don't forget the Jazz were in the NBA Championship Series 2 years in a row. back in the late 90s, and it was so fun. And there was no, at that time, discussion of how there's no way they can do this because they're a small market team. It can be done. It has been done. And to a degree, these are models to follow. They're not exactly the same way the teams were built, but in a lot of ways they are. I don't know how much, in today's day and age of the way free agency is constructed, the way salary caps and different levels and on, that it's you're saddled as much as maybe the league could have been headed had they not gotten things more under control. So, bottom line is they've got to stay the course with the Angels at the helm, and hopefully they will be the Pacers or the Thunder in 5 to 10 years. I shouldn't say 10. That'll scare Jazz fans. 5 years.
Oh, I mean, even 5 feels like forever, but it might be 5 years. This stuff takes time.
I know. Come on. Yeah.
This stuff takes time. They're gonna
Don't
need.
forget, it took Stockton and Malone a decade.
Yeah, and what I always remind people about that, like the Jazz traded Mitchell at 25 and Rudy at 28. I mean, can you imagine if they decided after the Jazz lost in like the Western Conference semis in '92 to trade John and Carl instead of letting them grow, right? I mean, but Dave, therein lies the problem, right? Like ultimately, it's not just finding players. It's finding players who want to stay here and finding players who will commit to a long-term build. Because the Jazz will never have the ability to pick up the phone and call Nico Harrison and say, trade us Luka. Like, they're going to have to do what OKC has done and what Indiana has done, and that simply takes time. And the problem is they're not further along than they were 3 years ago when they started this. In fact, they're probably further behind.
Yeah, and you're right. So you're saying Cooper Flagg's off the table, probably. But you're absolutely right. Look, it's a difficult thing to do, honestly, in any sport. And I don't know that the Jazz are ever going to completely build a championship team. I mean, the Angels did it in Boston, but that's Boston. It's just a different world. Look how close your Knicks got to it this year, and even that's imperfect. They had to fire their coach because they didn't think, well, that's just another whole story. But that's why when I say 5 years, I can see the team certainly being competitive maybe in 5 years or so. But there's no guarantee. I don't know if they're ever going to get to it's hard to get to a championship. You know that. I mean, what do you think Boston thinks about this year not getting there? I'm sure, the Denver probably thought they had another championship run in them. So it's very, very difficult. But all you can do is, hire the right people and trust them to try to get the rebuilding process online. And we'll see where it goes.
So over the past 48, 72 hours-ish, several outlets, including our friend Sarah Todd from the Deseret News, who joins us consistently. Bill Simmons talked about this on his podcast, and this morning it was Zach Lowe, and I think it was Kevin Pelton, and I love Zach's pod. Zach's great, so I try to listen to whatever he's talking about off-season stuff. So we have 3 very reputable NBA sources indicate that the Jazz currently are actively taking calls on both Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler. What does that say to you, Dave? If they're willing to really listen to offers and potentially act on them, what does it say to you about where they're at right now in this process?
Well, first of all, I mean, I don't know. I don't think any of them know that definitively. I get it, the whole source thing, and I don't think listening to offers on Lauri Markkanen are even remotely a shock, just as they wouldn't be for Colin Sexton or Jordan Clarkson or John Collins or many of the other vets. To be honest with you, the Walker Kessler thing seems really surprising to me. He very much fits in line with this rebuilding process. But I guess at the end of the day, you listen to anyone on anything, and it's easy to just go out and say, hey, the Jazz are listening to offers, because listening and acting upon are 2 entirely different things. And I guess you got to at least listen. There would have to be something, in my opinion, outlandish. Like the only way you move Walker Kessler is if you can get Cooper Flagg or something like that. So that's the way I view that. I'm not trying to diminish any of these reports, but 2 things: when you get close to the draft and when you get close to the trade deadline. In all the years that I've been covering this, the things that usually don't happen are the things that a lot of sources are claiming will happen. that's just kind of the way it is. So we'll let it play out and see where it goes.
Counterpoint, Dave, because this could also mean if we take Austin Ainge at his word, his press conference last week in response to the question Sean O'Connell asked him about tanking and manipulating minutes when he said, you will not see that this year. If we take Austin at his word, what it could mean, if they're willing, and I agree with you about Walker, they're not getting Cooper Flagg for Walker. We can go ahead and put that aside. But I agree with you that trading a 23-year-old who has shown he is a rotational piece and can impact winning if there are good teammates around him is a tough ask. Lowry is turning 29 next year. So what it could indicate, if we take Austin at his word that they will not be manipulating minutes and they will be serious about competing this year in a way that they weren't last year, could it simply mean that their plan is to add the 5th pick this year, to add the 21st pick this year, to maybe even add these second-round picks, and they draft 4 players that are between like 19 and 22, and you just put those players next to Collier, who's 20, Filipowski, who's 21, so is Keontae, Taylor, who's 21, and even a guy like Cody Williams, who has to show more year 2, is also 20 years old. So essentially, you march out a roster the same way Washington did last year, where it's only young players starting playing minutes. You get off of Clarkson, you get off, you get off of Sexton. You move on from Markkanen, you move on from Walker, maybe even, you look to move anybody who's not older than like 23 years old. And then next year, the Jazz are trying hard, but they just have kids who are not ready to win, and therefore they can actually back up Austin's assertion like, yes, we are trying to compete while maintaining their top 8 protected pick that goes to OKC. I mean, if they're willing to move on from Markkanen and Kessler, it could indicate the approach next year is simply kids playing every night, all night.
Okay, let me go back to a week ago, or on back-to-back nights, I had 2 media guests on that I should be careful. I'm not going to say I really like them a lot because you are one of them. No, I'm kidding. I love you. But that I trust with Jazz knowledge. One of them is an employee, so you get a different perspective. One of them isn't, and that's you and David Locke. And I had you on back-to-back nights, and we all discussed basically that same thing on both nights. How to say that will not happen this year in terms of taking or manipulating minutes is very easy to do when they are going to do exactly what you just said, and that circles back to your previous question. So obviously the veterans are on the block, because if you're not trading them and you're claiming you're not manipulating minutes, then you've got to play them. And then if you play them, now your problem is you're going to win 30 games. So you alluded to this last week. Locke alluded to this, and he's an employee of the team, as you know, last week. And I think that's exactly what the plan is. However, I still don't believe Walker Kessler is part of that, because I think you can do exactly what you just said. You take every one of these first and second year players and you run them every single night, and then you plug Walker Kessler in where you need to, and that team is not going to win a lot of games. So you haven't manipulated minutes and you haven't tanked, but what you have done is you're preparing your young guys for, let's go back to that 5-year time frame again, for when they're ready to compete at a higher level by playing them all the time. Now, if you were all in, think about all these young guys. If you still had Rudy and Donovan and, Mike Conley and some of these other guys, they'd barely even get minutes. They'd all be in the G League. So it's a perfect plan, to be honest with you. Bring all the youngsters in, let them do their thing. And no disrespect to all the other members of the media, but you both talked to me about this on the air a week ago.
All right.
I agree with you 100%.
All right, moving over here, Dave, on Friday of last week, and I always get so bummed out when a big piece of news breaks like 10 minutes after the show ends, but about 10 or 15 minutes after we said goodnight at 6, the alert came in. I think it was Pete Thamel from ESPN, reported that the House v. NCAA settlement was actually pushed across the line. And so we now have a little bit of a framework for what this is going to look like. There are plenty of things that still have to be decided, but the one thing that we do know, set in stone, is starting on July the 1st, College athletic departments can start paying players, and it will be a chunk of change that is $20.5 million over the fiscal year. It will expire in June of next year, and then we'll kind of recalibrate and see how it goes. Keanu Dawes was just announced as the first Utah athlete to sign the rev share deal. The football players will sign coming up in just a little bit. But we were debating on the show, and I think it's kind of interesting to consider. And certainly from a Utah perspective, we need to be a little bit more salient and kind of point out unique dynamics. And Porter kind of pointed this out earlier, where it's not like the football program at any P4 school generates the most revenue. It just does, and it always will.
Yeah.
Then men's basketball is typically number 2. But at Utah, the Red Rocks generate revenue and tremendous interest. I mean, the building is packed every time they have a meet. They have been able to build this brand that people really support. And there are other programs that deserve investment that haven't had investment prior to. They've already had to cut beach volleyball. And, you know, if we're going to be grown-ups about this, you have to acknowledge where the revenue is generated. And smart business is to allocate the revenue you're allowed to the places that will pay you back with good ROI. And that is your football program. But when you consider that next year will mark 10 years since men's basketball has been the NCAA tournament, and if we're honest, there's no way Alex Jensen's taking that job without some sort of promise. The Red Rocks have a case to be made, too. Generally speaking, how do you think Mark Harlan's going to handle this to split the $20.5 million over the course of these athletes that play for the U?
Well, I think, a couple of things. First of all, you're right about the popularity of gymnastics. Now, keep in mind, it's a lot easier to get a ticket and a lot less expensive to get a ticket to a gymnastics meet than basketball. Having said that, you're right. There is a popularity factor there. Again, football, you're right, is king. It's amazing at BYU, for instance, where they've almost turned basketball into the big dog, but it isn't going to change anything. It's always going to be football. And you kind of alluded to this as you were going through your comment right there. It's going to be, I'm assuming anyway, it's going to be based on the ROI. It's what it has to be based on. I'm curious to see what's going to be left of, because NIL is still out there. I don't really understand how that's regulated. I love the idea of, the schools having that $20 million, because while that may equalize the playing field, don't forget they still got to. Maybe you have more knowledge on how this NIL stuff still shakes out. But at the end of the day, I mean, come on, the big dog is college football. It's only going to get bigger as the playoff expands, and I'm going to assume that Mark Harlan and Taylor Randall and those that make those decisions up there are going to, obviously feed the biggest hand first, and that's going to be football. And the other thing that's tough about that is the football rosters are so much bigger that you just have to deal with it. But that's the way it works, and we'll see how it shakes out. I'm interested to see how all of our local schools, Utah, BYU, even Utah State, although they're at a slightly different level, are going to compete nationwide with this. How the Utes will compete in the Big 12 and against other teams when it comes to recruiting and that kind of thing. But overall, I personally believe it's a good thing for college football and college sports. And I think you probably agree with me on that one.
Yeah, it's long overdue. Anyone who's been paying attention understands that. All right, Dave, let's get a quick tease for the television gold that comes our way at 10:35 tonight.
Oh, this is so incredible. We normally do 5 questions with Spence every other week, but I've conned him into coming 2 weeks in a row. So we're going to hit 5 questions with Spence tonight on Talking Sports. Yes, a couple of golf questions in there. One of them involves Lefty, which is always important. We may talk a little about the NCAA ruling. We'll talk a little, and yes, we'll talk Royals. But the question, which was created by my crack staff of producers, actually is a really good one. You'll have to agree with me on that. So we'll leave it at that, and we'll get to that tonight on Talking Sports, KMYU, tonight.
Do you need an assistant to inform you of when you have radio hits to make sure you're on time moving forward?
No, I think we both are clear now on where the communication kind of dropped. We did have a discussion, but I do admit Porter's really good about my daily reminder, and that one might have gotten away.
All right, pal. Well, I'll see you in just a couple hours. Thanks for the time.
Okay, you're the best. Thanks, guys.
Dave Fox, 1035 KMYU tonight. We'll have some fun talking about the most random topics he's ever sent me to discuss on a sports television show here in the market. So it should be fun. We will catch a break. We have 3 hours down. We have 1 hour to go. Get back to some NBA playoff stuff. University of Utah basketball team has finalized their roster. Keanu Dawes has become the first Ute athlete to officially sign a rev share deal. Then, of course, we have both Stanley Cup and NBA Finals to get to as well. So 1 hour left of the program on a Tuesday afternoon edition of The Drive with Spence Checketts. You got dialed in to ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. We are proud to be part of Utah's ESPN radio network. All right, let's get it. Drive time. Tuesday afternoon style, 5 minutes past the hour of 5 o'clock. It is another scorching hot Utah day outside here in downtown Salt Lake City, Utah. It's out of our Broadway Media Studios. And as it is every single day, it's good to have you along for the ride. 1 hour left in the show today. It's been a fun show, busy show, a lot going on. Utah football locking up a couple of recruits for their 2026 class. They've been busy over the past couple of weeks hosting some of these young men. LaMarcus Bell, a three-star running back, originally committed to Oregon State, had offers from BYU, Cal, and others, has committed to play for the University of Utah. Utah football also has a commitment from a three-star quarterback out of Georgia named Michael Johnson, who, when you read about him, he sounds a lot like Devin Dampier, of course, the new offensive coordinator, Jason Beck. So a little random football recruiting news today. And it is a historic day of sorts from the Utah men's basketball side of things. Keanu Dawes is the first student athlete in Utah athletics history to sign a revenue-sharing agreement. Utah will directly be paying him starting July the 1st. Football players will sign their deal after, and obviously the rest of the basketball roster will sign their deals when the time comes. So Alex Jensen busy finalizing his roster. And Utah basketball signed a new guard today. His name is Jacob Patrick. He's 6'6", 195 from Germany, who's been playing professionally since the age of 15, averaged about 10 points a game in the German BBL, playing against older competition, shoots about 36% from three, and I believe that finalizes the Utah men's basketball roster. So there you go. So Alex has his roster in place. We've been discussing the NIL dynamic on the program today as far as $20.5 million allocated to these young people who play sports in colleges now, and how the Mark Harlans of the world and the Brian Santiagos of the world will divvy that pie up. And we'll kind of have to see how that plays out. Of course, NBA Finals, top of mind awareness here. Game 3 comes your way tomorrow. That will be at 6:30 Mountain Time, Gainesbridge Arena in Indianapolis, Indiana, where the series is tied at one game apiece. Florida Panthers made quite the statement last night. They smoked Edmonton 6-1, and the Stanley Cup Finals resumes on Thursday. Don't forget, you can hear both of those products here on ESPN 700. We are your home of both the NBA Finals and the Stanley Cup Finals. Going to have a fun conversation with one of the best broadcasters. Probably it's safe to say that we've ever had the experience of listening to and watching. Ian Eagle has won 70 Emmys. I have lost track. He'll join us coming up after a quick break. We'll talk some NBA Finals. We'll talk a little NIL, some college basketball. Ian calls the Final Four for CBS. He had a front row seat to a lot of the young prospects the Jazz are going to be looking at as the NBA draft is only a few weeks away. But before we catch a break, I want to tell you about my friends at Outlaw Distilling. It's a brand new partner here on the ESPN Sports Network, Outlaw Distillery. It's a homegrown, grain-to-glass, nitty-gritty whiskey, vodka, rum, and moonshine distillery right here in Salt Lake County. Outlaw Distillery, Utah grown with so much history here of cowboys, outlaws, mining, and more. Outlaw has everything on the spirit spectrum, from their spiced rum, their vanilla bean rum, Outlaw coffee rum, honey bourbon, barrel-proof whiskey, vodka, and moonshine. They have it all, and they're embracing the Outlaw name by being rebellious and making some very unique spirits that aren't being seen or created by any other distilleries in Utah. Happy to have them on board. If you want to take a sip of their spirits, you can either find them in local liquor stores where their bottles are available, or book a tasting. So if you tell them I sent you, they're going to hook you up with your shot glass. You can keep that as a souvenir, and you get to try all their spirits. Get your tour and tasting booked at outlawdistillery.com today. Opened in 2015 as only the fourth distillery in the great state of Utah. Deeply rooted in Utah history and tradition, even the name Outlaw is inspired by legendary characters such as Butch Cassidy and the Outlaw Trail, which served as primary transportation route for many of the notorious Wild West outlaws. The vision for Outlaw Distillery is clear. Help show the world that some of the best spirits can come from one of the least expected places, i.e. here in Utah. All right, we will catch a quick break, but the legend himself, Ian Eagle, joins us coming up on the other side of a Tuesday drive right here on ESPN 700. Got a little U.S. men's national team action on the station tonight. It is a international friendly between the United States of America and Switzerland on the pitch. Gold Cup will begin coming up this weekend. I believe this weekend, I think it's Trinidad and Tobago. Diego Luna on the Gold Cup roster. RSL will be back in action this weekend after a week off last week. So we have a little U.S. men's national team soccer coming up. Don't forget, I'll be on television with Dave Fox tonight, 10:35 KMYU. We call it 5 Questions with Spence. Yeah, busy show. A lot going on. Have you watched? So 2 different mock drafts today. Jonathan Givony, Sam Vecini from The Athletic now have Con Knipple in the top 3. Have you watched much of him? I mean, all the attention was on Cooper Flagg, but I honestly felt if the Jazz drafted him at 5, that would be a bit of a stretch. Like, Givony has him at 2 now to San Antonio and not Dylan Harper. That kind of caught me off guard.
It caught me off guard a little bit as well. I don't know if I agree with that one. Honestly, I mean, I don't watch the tape like Givony does. I don't get into the draft stuff like some of those guys do. I just don't see the upside. Now, here's the deal. I think Con Knipple is a legitimate NBA player. I want to be clear. If I have a top 15 pick, if I have a top 10 pick, I have very little reservations about that because I think he's going to be a rotation piece, if not a really, really good bit piece. But if I have a top 5 pick in the NBA draft, I want upside. I want, in many circumstances, to be taking a big swing. I don't necessarily think that's Con Knipple, but maybe I'm missing something there. Maybe, like Donovan Mitchell at Louisville, he wasn't asked to do certain things at Duke because of the players around him, and he has some traits that these guys are seeing that we aren't. It's possible, but again, I think with a top 5 pick, I may be looking at upside a little bit more than I am looking at like a floor, which if we're looking at a floor, Con Knipple might be number 2, number 3, number 4. I just don't know where I would be looking. If I'm the Jazz right now, I'm taking a bigger swing in 2025 than that.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting to read 2 different guys who I respect a lot in their process to talk about Knipple climbing up the draft board. Don't forget, June the 25th, Jazz will be on the clock at number 5 and number 21. At least that's what they have now. A lot of rumors about potential movement. We'll have great draft night coverage for you for both round 1 and round 2. And then, of course, we'll be all over the NHL draft, which gets underway shortly thereafter. All right, we will say goodnight. You got a little U.S. men's national team international friendly coming up on the other side. Porter, what comes our way on a Wednesday edition of the show?
On a Wednesday edition of The Drive, we'll catch up with Tom Haberstroh. Tom was not able to hop on yesterday, his usual Monday hit, so we'll double up on our NBA Daily Assist. Zach Harper stops by as well. NHL Stanley Cup Finals with Neil Smith. And then Pablo Mastroeni, of course, looking ahead to a weekend action for RSL and probably recapping a little U.S. men's national team. His guy, Diego Luna, in action tonight.
All right, there we go. So some fun Wednesday action coming up for you. And, of course, the NBA Finals will be resuming as well. And we will say goodnight. Special thank you, Ian Eagle, Tim McMahon, Brad Knight, and Dave Fox. If you miss any of the sound from the show today, check out our website. It's ESPN700sports.com. Make sure to download our mobile app and take us on the go. ESPN 700 app is available in the App Store and the Google Play Store. Then finally, for what we do in our space every afternoon for 4 hours, it's all there for your disposal up on our podcast page. And we ask you to become a supporter of that because it does help us. It's called The Drive with Spence Checketts. It's available wherever you get your shows. So subscribe, rate, review, say nice things in the comments. Give us all the stars. It actually helps. For Porter, I'm Spence saying goodnight. Enjoy your Tuesday evening. We'll talk to you on a Wednesday Drive. As always, you can find it right here on ESPN 700.